A town on the edge of the Nile was a patchwork of mud brick dwellings, narrow lanes and workshops where daily life unfolded, with little comfort but much resilience. Most houses were no more than small square cells, sometimes a single room, sometimes two chambers joined directly or divided by a tiny courtyard. Roofs were made from palm fronds laid side by side, so low that a careless man rising too quickly might strike his head through them. Families with greater means lived in sturdier homes. These had a solid ground floor, and above it, a terrace with several rooms reached by a staircase built against the courtyard wall. The lower rooms were dark and cool, used for cattle, for slaves, or for storing clothes and provisions, while the family gathered in the upper story where light and air were better. Floors and ceilings were fashioned from split palm trunks, covered with beaten earth, a simple method that required little expense. Rain seldom troubled Upper Egypt, yet on rare occasions the sky opened with astonishing violence. Once in many decades, torrents could fall for hours upon the plain of Thebes. The fragile roofs were pierced within minutes, terraces collapsed into the rooms below, and the walls dissolved into muddy streams. Entire districts became heaps of blackened paste mixed with broken beams and half-melted bricks. In another land, such a disaster might have meant permanent ruin. But here a few weeks of labour restored what had been lost. As soon as the storm ended, men, women and children sifted through the wreckage, retrieving wood, tools and utensils. From the softened clay of the old buildings they moulded new huts that the sun quickly dried and hardened. Within days the traces of catastrophe vanished, as if nothing had occurred. Rebuilding required little ceremony. Workers carried baskets of mud from the nearest pool, kneaded it with gravel and chopped straw, pressed the mixture into wooden moulds, and laid the bricks out to dry. No one troubled with deep foundations. The ground was merely levelled and the first courses placed directly upon it. In a short time the ground floor was closed and roofed, and life resumed its ordinary rhythm. Possessions were few and of slight value, so doors often stood open day and night. Poverty itself protected many homes from theft. Those who had something worth guarding relied on heavy wooden locks secured with a dab of clay impressed by a personal seal. Breaking such a seal was a serious crime, yet fear did not always deter wrongdoers. Stories circulated of houses entered while their owners were at work, of loaves, cakes and jars of oil stolen or maliciously destroyed. Victims appealed to the local police, but justice was uncertain. The captain of the Libyan soldiers who oversaw the quarter might be related to the suspected thieves and unwilling to offend them. On festival days, when workshops closed and the streets filled with idlers, shops were easy targets. A poor shopkeeper could return from visiting his family to find his bread gone, his drink spoiled, and his livelihood threatened. Only the generosity of patrons sometimes saved such men from complete ruin. Although the law permitted several wives, ordinary labourers and small tradesmen usually lived with only one woman, often a relative from within their own kin. The household was close-knit, yet the husband spent most of his hours away. At sunrise he left barefoot and bareheaded, dressed in little more than cotton drawers and a tight felt cap. His meal was simple: 2 cakes of grain baked in the ashes, perhaps an onion, occasionally a drop of oil or a scrap of dried fish. At midday, work paused for a brief rest, then continued until evening. Every craft carried its own hardships. The blacksmith sweated beside the furnace, fingers rough as a crocodile's hide and skin darkened by soot. Artisans who carved wood or stone toiled day and night, summoned again after their daily labour was finished. The mason sought orders in every kind of hard rock and must return to the yard at dawn, even when his back was near breaking. The barber wandered from quarter to quarter in search of customers, working without pause simply to fill his belly. The dyer's hands reeked of rotting fish, his eyes burned with fatigue, and he came to hate the very cloth he handled. The shoemaker lived in perpetual misery, his health as poor as that of a dead fish, with nothing to eat but the leather he shaped. Wages earned with such effort barely supported a family. Payment was commonly made in kind. A few measures of grain, a little oil, some salted provisions, and on feast days a jar of beer or wine. Overseers carried sticks as signs of authority and used them freely. It was said that a man obeyed only when his back felt the rod. The stick had raised pyramids, dug canals, and won battles for the kings. It now urged the builders of temples and the makers of linen and jewels. From minister to slave, all were equal before it, and a man could be praised on his tombstone for having lived without once being beaten by a magistrate. Yet the workman accepted this harshness with a strange cheerfulness. Quick-witted and fond of laughter, he found amusement in the smallest incident. An apprentice cutting his finger, a comrade dozing over his task, or an ass braying in the street. Jokes flew about until the overseer's stick restored order. Only the scribe claimed to escape such discomforts. Learning, it was said, brought every good thing on earth. But the title of scribe covered many ranks. Princes and high priests bore it, yet so did humble clerks who recorded labourers each morning, counted cattle, or kept the accounts of a carpenter. A scribe was simply one who could read, write, and reckon. For a man of good birth, this skill adorned his station. For a poor youth, it opened the door to employment in an office or a wealthy household. For many working families, the greatest hope lay in a son who could escape the hardest forms of labour. Even when money was scarce, parents were willing to give up almost anything if it meant their child might learn skills that could lift him above the crowd, or at least spare him the most punishing life. When a boy showed quick understanding, he was often sent out around the age of 6 or 7 to a neighbourhood school. There, an elderly teacher introduced him to the basics: how to recognise signs, form them with the hand, and count and calculate well enough to manage everyday tasks. It was only a beginning, but it opened a door. A few years later, around 10 or 12, the family would take him away from that first classroom and place him under the guidance of a professional scribe. Apprenticeship was not romantic. The boy followed his master into offices and workyards and spent long stretches doing the same work over and over, copying letters, notices, agreements, records, and lists. At first, he did not fully grasp what he was writing, yet repetition trained the memory. He learned by absorbing patterns, how official messages were structured, how requests were made, how accounts were arranged, how respect was shown in the choice of words. Practice texts circulated for this purpose, filled with model passages and admired examples. Some of these models were short and sharp, built for speed and clarity, the kind of report meant to be read quickly by men who had no patience for decoration. Others were crafted in a more emotional style, especially when someone was pleading for a favour, a day off, or a special allowance. In those pieces, feeling was used like a tool, turning the request into a performance of exhaustion, longing, or distress. The point was never poetry for its own sake. The point was persuasion, and a skilled writer knew which voice would work best. Training moved in stages. The apprentice copied until his hand became steady and his eye accurate. The master corrected missed words, fixed spelling, and marked clumsy signs in the margin. When the pages were complete and the boy could reproduce the standard phrases from memory, the next lesson began. Fragments were broken apart and rearranged. He had to stitch separate pieces together and produce new versions that still sounded correct. After that came real composition. First a few lines, then full letters, then more complex messages and records. Only when he could manage the ordinary daily writing without constant help did the apprenticeship truly end. At that point, a small post might be found, something minor, unnoticed, but steady. With a position secured, many married young and settled into routine, satisfied to live quietly inside the narrow circle where life had placed them. In some offices, that routine became hereditary. Jobs passed from father to son so often that entire chains of relatives could hold the same kinds of posts for generations. Most remained average, neither rising nor falling, simply repeating the same work year after year. Yet every so often, one person pushed beyond the usual level. Good handwriting mattered, but it was not enough on its own. A sharper mind, a better sense of timing, useful connections, tireless energy, and a reputation for reliability could bring notice. Sometimes advancement depended on less clean virtues as well. Careful opportunism, strategic silence, knowing when to bend without breaking. The leap from obscurity to power was rare, but it was not impossible. A man might begin in a provincial storehouse, recording deliveries of bread and vegetables, and after decades of steady service, end up commanding enormous authority. In such a case, wealth arrived in visible, almost physical forms: overflowing grain, packed storerooms, precious goods, full stables. People who once treated him as an equal approached him with lowered eyes and cautious gestures, because status in this world could transform a person as completely as fortune transformed a house. While men chased wages and advancement, the household itself was driven by women. Among the lower and middle ranks, a woman often held a position that could surprise outsiders. She could inherit alongside brothers, manage property, and run her home as the central authority of daily life. She moved through streets and markets openly, spoke freely, and handled affairs without constant supervision. Her clothing was simple in shape and practical for work, and her appearance was often shaped by long-standing customs. Dark lining around the eyes, coloured lips, tattooing in delicate patterns, hair treated with oils and arranged in tight, careful sections. These habits were not only for display. Some had practical value as protection against dust, glare, and infection. On ordinary days, the look could remain plain. On festivals, small luxuries appeared: sandals, bracelets, bead collars, flowers and bands, items that brightened the body even when the household remained poor. The day began early. Before sunrise, she lit the fire and portioned out bread. Men were sent off to workshops, animals were driven out, and older children were assigned their tasks. After the household began moving, she went for water. At the river or canal, she met other women, exchanged news, washed quickly, filled a jar, and carried it home with the practiced posture of someone trained by weight. Hips braced, chest forward, neck held firm. Returning home did not mean rest. Grinding grain came next. On a slanted stone, she crushed kernels with another stone, dampening it as needed, working for a long time for flour that remained rough, uneven, and mixed with husk and grit. It was kneaded with water and a piece of old dough saved as starter, then shaped into thick cakes and baked under hot ash. Fuel was another challenge. Wood was scarce and costly. So many households relied on what they could make themselves. Dung from animals was collected, mixed, and shaped into lumps or bricks, then dried in the sun against a wall or in the courtyard. It burned slowly with a light flame and strong smell, giving steady heat. The bread it baked often kept a sour edge and carried the taste of its making. Over years, the tiny bits of grit and the roughness of the flour did their damage. In old age, many people's teeth were worn down severely, the mouth shaped by a lifetime of coarse food. Between these heavy tasks, she cooked what she could, spun thread, wove fabric, stitched and repaired clothing, and carried goods to market: poultry, eggs, butter, pieces of linen, selling enough to keep the household balanced. All of this happened while infants cried, toddlers clung to her, and a newborn might still be nursing at her breast. Marriage came early. Motherhood came earlier still, and by the time many women reached 30, they could already be grandmothers. Large families were welcomed, not only because children were seen as a blessing, but because raising them required little in the way of clothing or special care. Small bracelets or an amulet might be the only ornaments. Many children went unclothed until they were older, running freely in the heat. As soon as a child could walk, work began in small ways, gathering herbs and branches, collecting materials for fuel, driving geese, then helping take animals to pasture and water. Around 6 or 8, some were sent to school or placed into training, often in the father's trade. Many never reached that stage. Weakness, poor diet, and neglect could end a life early. In large families, the children seen playing in the street were often the survivors of a larger number that had not lived. Yet those who made it through early childhood tended to be remarkably tough, shaped by hardship into endurance. Infirmity and chronic weakness appeared less common than in some other lands. Not because life was kinder, but because it was so demanding. One problem, however, remained widespread: diseases of the eyes. Fine sand in the air, fierce light, cool damp mornings after clear nights. Together, these conditions irritated and damaged vision. In busy streets, it was common to see inflamed eyelids, clouded eyes, and blindness, injuries that healers could not always remedy. Years of work and frequent childbirth aged women quickly. Faces hollowed, shoulders bent. Bodies lost their youthful shape long before middle age. Yet this did not strip them of their place inside the family. They remained the centre of the home to the end, still treated as the valued heart of the household. Children were often identified through their mother, as if her name carried the truest proof of origin. Even religious language reinforced this idea, presenting the mother's bond as primary and unquestioned. Fathers, when they chose to speak seriously to their sons, sometimes framed the mother's sacrifice as a sacred debt. The argument was simple and hard to escape. She carried the child, nursed him for years, never refused the burden as he grew heavier, and even followed him to school, bringing food and drink while he learned. When he became an adult with a house of his own, he was expected to remember that helpless beginning and repay it with respect. Neglecting a mother was not described as rude or shameful alone. It was treated as dangerous, as if the wrong done at home could rise into a curse that the heavens would hear. Moving deeper into the city, the atmosphere shifts. The streets are still narrow and twisting, but the buildings feel different. Better planned, more regular, and taller. From the ground, the sky is reduced to a thin strip of light between dark walls. Everything suggests comfort and money, yet nothing is shown openly. The street-facing sides of these houses look dull and restrained. Windows are few and set high. Doors are low and kept shut. If one happens to be half open, it reveals little more than the end of a shadowy passage or the first steps of a staircase disappearing into darkness. Sounds leak out in fragments. A dog barking somewhere behind a wall, a child crying in a distant room, a brief burst of voices that vanishes as quickly as it came. Passers-by exchange quick greetings. Small donkeys loaded with straw trot past under the rhythm of a driver's stick. The wealth here hides itself, wrapped in silence and thick walls. At certain points, the street tightens even more. A house may jut out above the road and meet another across the way, forcing anyone walking below into a cramped tunnel of shade and stale air. Then, Almost without warning, the passage opens into a small square, flooded with sunlight and noise. This is where the market gathers, and the city suddenly feels alive. Animals stand in uneven clusters in the centre, sheep and geese, goats and donkeys, long-horned cattle waiting patiently for buyers. Around them, vendors squat in layers near the house fronts, arranging goods in reed baskets or on low boards. Bread and sweet cakes, fruit and vegetables, fish and meat, cooked dishes ready to eat, bits of jewellery, perfume, cloth, small tools. Necessities and luxuries sit side by side as if they belong to the same world. People drift from stall to stall slowly, inspecting quality with the careful eye of someone who cannot afford mistakes. Many shoppers carry something made at home, not a coin. A man may bring a newly finished tool, a pair of sandals, a woven mat, or a small box filled with metal rings and twisted wires. These pieces of metal stand in for value and can be traded like money. Bargaining becomes a performance. Two buyers might stop at the same basket of onions and grain, each offering a different object. A bright necklace of beads, a wooden fan, a fire ventilator used to feed a flame. The seller does not rush. He takes one item, examines it closely, and begins the slow process of setting its worth. Voices rise. One side claims the offer is too high, the other insists it is too low. Little by little, the price shifts through small concessions until the exchange feels fair enough to both. Only then do onions change hands, or a measured portion of wheat is agreed upon. Elsewhere, a pair of hard-working sandals is offered for a small pot of perfume. The buyer praises the strength of the leather. The seller shrugs, shoes are useless to him today, and tries to tempt the other side with scent, describing how only a few drops are needed. A woman pushes 2 jars forward, holding them under a stranger's nose as proof that her ointment is worth the trade. Nearby, 2 men argue over a packet of fishhooks, while another woman stands with a little box of bracelets and necklets, waiting for someone whose needs match her goods. In one corner, a fish is being cleaned as the buyer presses for a lower price, trying to win a discount, while the seller insists the fish is fresh and fair. When the purchase is large, the logic becomes more complicated. A bull might be traded for a woven mat, several measures of honey, jars of oil, and a handful of other items, each one counted, compared, and balanced until the deal holds together. Behind such transactions, there is always calculation, even if no one writes it down on the spot. The value of objects is often thought of in metal weight, and that habit spreads into smaller purchases too. Traders dealing in grain, meat, bread, and everyday goods prefer metal rings or wires, because they are easier than a pile of mixed objects. A razor can be priced in metal. A jar of wine can be priced in metal. A goat can be priced in metal. Even when barter happens openly, metal weight sits underneath as the hidden language of value. But metal brings its own problems. The rings and wires do not always contain what people claim they contain. Some are too light, some are mixed with cheaper material. That is why scales appear again and again in the market. Metal is weighed, then weighed again, because trust is fragile. The weighing itself becomes another stage for argument. People complain loudly that the balance is wrong, that the weight was placed badly, that the measure must be tested again. After enough shouting, exhaustion does what honesty cannot. The dispute ends in compromise, and both sides walk away, acting satisfied. The deeper danger comes from deliberate fraud, metal carefully diluted with cheaper content, made to look correct until it is tested. Everyone knows this risk, and it feeds the constant suspicion that hovers over every serious deal. Beyond the main square, the market stretches outward into streets lined with stalls and workshops. These narrow lanes function like open-air bazaars, and the crowd grows thicker. Goods appear from far beyond the city, mixed among local products. Fine cloth, decorated jewellery, scented woods and gums, rare stones, metals, and strange materials from distant coasts all sit beside Egyptian linen, glasswork, furniture, and tools. Shops are usually small, often no more than a square room or a simple booth open to the street. At night, wooden shutters close them off, secured with crossbars. Inside, there are mats, low stools, and shelves fixed to the walls. Valuable items are kept out of sight in a back room or a chest, not displayed where hands can reach them. Many shopkeepers are also craftsmen. Sales and production happen in the same space. Apprentices and workers sit behind the front line of goods, shaping, cutting, pounding, weaving, repairing. Nothing is hidden. A curious customer can watch the process because the craft is part of the business. In some districts, trades cluster together by habit: leather workers near leather workers, metal workers near metal workers. Yet in busy market streets, every kind of shop can appear side by side, one after another with no strict order. At midday, the rhythm changes. The heat builds, and hunger brings people toward food stalls. A sweetmaker lays out preserved dates, thick syrups, and cakes flavoured with honey and spices. Behind him, assistants crush almonds and pistachios, pour and filter liquids, and combine ingredients with the careful seriousness of a small laboratory. Across the way, a cook shop fights to keep up. Stews bubble in heavy pots. Meat and vegetables vanish as quickly as they are served. Extra supplies hang from the ceiling, raw cuts waiting their turn to be thrown into the fire. One cook turns a goose on a spit while fanning the flame with a hand-held ventilator, keeping the heat fierce enough to brown the skin. Some customers buy and leave, carrying food home for the family meal. Others sit down on stools and eat on the spot, draped in their cloaks, settling in as if they plan to stay through the slow hour that follows. Even small services appear in the middle of all this. A roaming barber finds a customer among the diners and shaves his head quickly, working fast before taking his own meal. Next door, a shoemaker's shop stays busy. Several workers are constantly in motion. One cuts leather into thick strips and softens it by hammering. Another punches holes with an awl. Another threads straps and pulls them tight, sometimes using his teeth to drag stubborn leather into place. This is not footwear made for show. It is practical, durable gear built for hard streets and hard work. A tough sole, thongs passing through loops at the heel, a strap anchored between toes and drawn over the instep. Finished pairs hang on the wall alongside half-cut pieces and stacked skins, evidence of orders that never stop coming. Nearby, the goldsmith's space is smaller and more controlled. A tiny anvil, simple tools, a furnace, and a single apprentice. Cheap rings and bracelets might be displayed openly, but the more valuable pieces are kept in a chest at the back. Raw metal arrives in many forms. Nuggets, weighed packets, bars, rings, carried in from deserts, coasts, and trade routes. Stones come from different landscapes too. Green and red varieties, hard, bright pieces meant for setting and decoration. Rarer blues brought by foreign merchants from regions most people will never see. A customer may hand over a piece of metal and wait while the craftsman turns it into jewellery. The goldsmith begins by weighing it carefully, then heats it until it softens. He works in cycles: heat, hammer, heat again, hammer again, until the metal becomes a strip of the right thickness. Then he bends it, closes it into a circle, joins the ends, cleans the surface with sand, cools it with water and polishes it by hand. The work takes time, and interruptions are constant. Another buyer asking for earrings, someone wanting a chain, someone bargaining over a small ring. The carpenter's shop has its own noise and smell, fresh wood, dust, and the steady rhythm of cutting. Chairs and frames are assembled nearby, some already fitted together, others still in pieces. One worker drills holes where a woven seat will be attached. Another shapes carved feet, rubbing them smooth until the form is clean and sharp. Tools lie close at hand, and one stands out above the rest. The adze. In the carpenter's hands, it replaces several tools at once. It splits wood, shapes planks, levels surfaces, and trims edges with speed. The work looks almost effortless when done by a practiced arm, yet the floor around the bench shows the truth: chips, shavings, and the quiet evidence of hours of labour. In the busy streets beyond the main square, the city's work can be heard before it is seen. A steady clicking from wooden frames mixes with the high, quick talk of women, leading to a room crowded with spinners and weavers. The air feels warm and fibrous, filled with the dust of flax. One woman rolls and twists the strands between her fingers, shaping rough fibre into thread. Another smooths it, pulling it tight and straight. A third feeds the line forward with practiced speed. Close to the floor, a simple loom is fixed in place, and two workers crouch on either side, passing the threads back and forth until a strip of linen slowly grows beneath their hands. The work is rhythmic, almost musical, and it continues without ceremony, open to anyone passing by. In the next doorway, a leather worker scrapes hides, with a sharp blade, shaving away stubborn tissue to leave the skin clean and ready. Nearby, a potter shapes red clay into bowls and plates, hands darkened by wet earth, movements quick and confident. Another craftsman works a pale stone vessel, hollowing and polishing the inside until it becomes smooth enough to reflect light. These trades carry no mystery here. They are done in public, in plain view, as ordinary as breathing. Tucked into the corner of a darker alley, half hidden where the street narrows, a drinking house does steady business. Most people keep a controlled routine, but when a man decides to make a holiday of the day, he does not deny himself the pleasure of drinking, and he is not embarrassed by the idea of becoming drunk. Some patrons enter openly, others slip in as if they do not want to be seen. The owners may not be held in the highest esteem, yet their trade is reliable, and their rooms rarely sit empty. Inside, the space looks freshly cleaned. Pale walls reflect what little light reaches in. Mats and stools line the floor, and a few heavy chairs are set against the sides. Regular customers sit close together, drinking in a loose fraternity, talking louder as the cups are refilled. The menu is broad: beer, wine, palm spirits, and thick cooked drinks, scented with herbs or perfumes. To many outsiders, these flavours would seem harsh or strange, but local taste runs in a different direction, and people return because they like what they are given. Wine is stored in large jars sealed tightly. The stopper is pressed down, then covered and marked, so that ownership is clear and tampering is obvious. The container carries practical information as well: where the wine came from and when it was produced. There are many kinds: pale and dark, dry and heavy, local varieties and foreign imports, carried by merchants who move along coastlines and desert tracks. Even so, beer remains the drink most closely tied to the ordinary population. It is brewed from soaked grain, thickened into a mash, then lifted by fermented bread. Freshly made, it can be soft and pleasing. But it is unstable and turns sour quickly, so people have learned tricks to help it last longer. Bitter infusions are added, giving the drink a sharper edge and slowing its spoilage. The range is wide: sweet beer, strong beer, sparkling beer, perfumed beer, spiced beer, served cold or warmed, and thicker versions made from millet that cling to the tongue. A good drinking house keeps variety, because customers argue about taste the way craftsmen argue about tools. A visitor barely settles onto a mat before a servant appears, eager and smiling, offering the first cup with words designed to pull the customer into the mood of the place. The invitation is repeated again and again, sometimes softly, sometimes with playful insistence, until refusal begins to look like bad manners. Regulars answer with jokes and teasing, turning the pressure into entertainment. The tone stays light at first, banter, laughter, exaggerated promises to drink until happiness arrives and sleep comes easily. People trade opinions on what each drink does to the body and the mind. Wine is described as warming and sociable, quickening speech and softening moods. Beer is blamed for heaviness, dullness, and sudden anger. A man overcome by wine might pitch forward, losing balance in a clumsy fall. A man drowned in beer is imagined as dropping backward, sprawled and helpless. These distinctions become part of the tavern's storytelling, repeated with the confidence of folk wisdom. Outside these rooms, moral teachers complain loudly. They warn that intoxication loosens speech, and speech can become dangerous when control disappears. A man might say what should never be said, and only discover later that his own words have turned into enemies. Drunkenness also strips a person of the ability to protect his interests. In the end, when the body fails and the drinker collapses, the crowd that laughed with him may step away and leave him on the floor. When business calls for him later, he is found lying in the street like a child, dirty and confused. Young men are singled out in these warnings as the most vulnerable, accused of ruining their futures through drink. The drunk is compared to a broken oar that no longer responds, a shrine without a god, a household without bread, a building whose beams shake as if the structure itself is failing. In public, he becomes a nuisance, shouting, throwing filth, and provoking strangers until the city authorities step in and drag him away to sober up in custody. Back in the street, the crowd flows like water. One stream heads toward the market, the other moves away from it. They collide at corners, merge, split, and cross again, and in that motion, the city displays its full variety. A large Egyptian town is never a single type of people. War brings slaves into its streets. Trade draws merchants from far regions. Over time, outsiders settle, marry, and blend into local families until sharp differences soften and disappear. Even among the officials close to power, foreign origins are common. Bloodlines have mixed for generations, fed by politics, conquest, and marriage. Skin tones and features shift from face to face as the crowd passes. Farmers darkened by sun, Nubians with deep bronze skin, men from farther south with near-black complexions, many dressed with the bare minimum in the heat. Occasionally a soldier with lighter skin stands out among darker faces, a reminder of distant mountain regions and northern routes. City men appear freshly shaved and painted, wigs carefully curled, cloaks folded and skirts moving with each step. Some walk barefoot, others wear sharply pointed sandals. A priest glides past with a shaved head and a white wrap. A chariot edges through the congestion, horses stepping carefully. Women of wealth pause in groups at shop fronts, negotiating with sellers. Their linen garments are fine and pale, arranged in layers that catch the light, so thin that they soften the outline more than they hide it. Then the pattern breaks. A sudden roar rises from one end of the street. The crowd parts sharply, pushed aside by a moving knot of workers, men coated in clay and plaster, shouting and gesturing as they force their way through. In the middle of them are a few frightened scribes, pulled along like unwilling witnesses. The workers are masons from a temple construction site. They have stopped work and turned their anger outward, marching to place their grievances before a powerful local governor who oversees royal building projects. Such scenes are not rare, because hunger produces conflict as surely as heat produces thirst. Payment for labour is often given in food rations, grain, oil, and basic provisions distributed at the start of the month and expected to last until the next distribution. On paper, it can be enough if used carefully. In reality, the first days are consumed in relief, families eating freely after weeks of strain. Mid-month brings anxiety and shrinking portions. The final week can become desperate, and weakness spreads through the worksite. Records kept by officials regularly show late-month slowdowns and sudden refusals to work, not always out of rebellion, but out of simple exhaustion. When supplies run out completely, men spill out of the yard and gather near a nearby shrine or wall, sitting down in a group and declaring that hunger has driven them there. Some accuse the clerks of cheating them, measuring short and profiting from the theft. The clerks answer that the workers waste what they receive as soon as they get it. Both claims can be true at the same time. Petty corruption on one side and desperate mismanagement on the other, all inside a system that leaves no margin for error. Supervisors and police officers appear to negotiate. Promises are offered. Sometimes the timing is political. The threat of public disorder becomes more serious when an inspection by the king is expected. Because a ruler might pass within hearing distance, pressure rises, then breaks into action. Guards try to block the exits. Workers gather in small clusters, whispering and planning. At sunrise, they surge toward an official, making his rounds, surround him, and drown him in noise. Other authorities are drawn in, including priests and administrators. Oaths are shouted, and the men refuse to return to their tasks. Finally, anger turns into movement. They decide to carry their complaint directly to the governor of the city. The governor's residence is not far, but the walk becomes a struggle. The crowd in the street does not always move quickly enough, and fists fly in the pushing. The house itself sits behind a long, low wall, the gate opening into a broad courtyard. Within the enclosure stand several structures, the main residence built of stone, tall and plain, rounded grain stores, and a larger vaulted storage space. At the first signs of trouble, the doorkeeper tries to secure the entrance, but the pressure from outside is too strong. The doors give way, and the mass of men floods into the court, hesitating for a moment, uncertain what comes next. The governor appears, and his presence alone restores some order. People trained from childhood to bow before authority fall into an uneasy discipline. One spokesman steps forward, and the others begin to respond, first cautiously, then louder as the story of hunger and need gathers force. Promises do not satisfy them. They demand action, extra grain, immediate help, something real. The governor tries to manage the situation, but time is suddenly short. A messenger slips through the crowd and warns that the king has left the palace and is moving through the city. An escort has already reached the next street. If the king arrives and finds a riot in the courtyard, the consequences could be severe. A quick decision follows. The governor orders his steward to open the granaries and distribute what can be spared at once. The men, unaware of the hidden motive, interpret the order as generosity and erupt in praise, calling the governor protector, helper, and shelter. The flattery pours out in heavy waves. He cuts it off sharply, pushes them toward the stores, and does not relax until the last striker disappears behind the grain buildings. Within minutes, the courtyard empties, the street regains its normal flow, and the city prepares itself for a royal passage as if nothing had happened. In this world, the arrival of the king is not treated as the arrival of an ordinary man. His appearance is staged with care. clothing and symbols are chosen to signal authority at a glance. Fine linen shaped precisely, ornaments and regalia designed to mark rank, and a headpiece that carries the signs of rule. He does not always travel in a slow procession. Sometimes he takes the reins himself and drives with confidence through the palace gate, presenting himself to the city with the brightness and speed of sunrise breaking the horizon. The belief behind this spectacle is deeper than politics. The king is imagined as more than a ruler. He is treated as the living link between the human world and the divine order. Royal blood is described as descending from the Creator, passed down through a chain that reaches back beyond memory. Stories circulate of divine intervention in succession. Moments when a god is said to have ensured an heir, confirming that the line remained unbroken. A queen might be described as receiving a visitation in the night, followed by the birth of a son who later becomes famous through conquest, building works, and the expansion of power. Such stories serve a purpose. They turn inheritance into destiny, and destiny into proof. Royal identity is also shaped through names. A prince keeps the name given at birth, but on the throne he adds new names and titles that declare his transformed status. Each name highlights a claim: strength, endurance, truth, divine favour, compressed into a formula repeated in official documents and carved into stone. Alongside these are additional names that connect the king to a sacred protector figure, presenting him as the living embodiment of that power on earth. These titles are not mere decoration. They are the language through which the state explains what the king is supposed to be. Behind the titles lies an idea of the person as twofold: the visible body and an unseen counterpart that accompanies it. That unseen counterpart is imagined as a double, an inner presence that shares the person's form and follows him through life. After death, it remains close to the tomb. The gods are believed to possess the same kind of double, only with greater freedom, able to project it into objects, statues, or living beings. Under this logic, the king becomes a vessel for divine force. At the moment he receives the crown, the sacred presence within him is said to awaken fully, making him not only a political ruler, but a living symbol. Every action of the ruler is treated as if it were part of a sacred ceremony. When he receives visitors, the man allowed to stand before him approaches with the same reverence offered to a shrine. If a council is summoned to discuss matters of state, the nobles begin not with practical arguments, but with words that sound more like a hymn than political debate. The king sits on his high golden seat, crowned with tall plumes, while attendants fan the warm air around him. On this particular day, the issue before the court is not war or tribute, but a problem far from the capital: the long road to the gold fields in the eastern desert. The caravans that carry the precious metal from those barren hills have sent desperate reports. Along the route, there is almost no water, and the animals collapse before they reach the next station. Half the men and donkeys die on the journey, and those who survive return exhausted and empty-handed. The council gathers to consider whether new wells should be dug. Yet before any practical suggestion is made, the officials rise one by one to praise the king's wisdom. They compare him to the sun that shapes the world, insisting that whatever he desires becomes real by morning. According to them, his knowledge reaches every corner of the land. His ears hear words spoken behind walls, and his eyes see farther than the brightest star. Such language flows easily in the palace, for the ruler is expected to appear more than human. After the chorus of admiration, the governor responsible for the southern provinces speaks with greater detail. He explains that the region has lacked reliable springs since ancient times. Previous kings ordered shafts to be dug, even to enormous depths, but no water was found. The message is clear: only a will as powerful as the king's could change the fate of that landscape. Encouraged by this mixture of flattery and necessity, the ruler commands new labour to begin. Teams of workers are sent toward the desert with tools and supplies, and the court records the decision as another proof of his exceptional authority. Such scenes reveal how the state understands power. The king is believed to stand between the human world and the realm of the gods. Every request to the divine must pass through him, even if only in name. When a family asks for protection for a deceased relative, the prayer is framed as if the king himself were presenting the offering. Stone inscriptions repeat the formula endlessly, declaring that the ruler grants the sacrifice so that the gods may show favour. It is a symbolic arrangement, yet it shapes the language of religion across the country. The gods, in return, are imagined to communicate directly with the throne. Dreams guide royal decisions, and statues within temples are treated as living messengers. When important questions arise, the image of a deity may be carried in procession and asked to signal approval by the slightest movement. A nod from the sacred figure settles disputes that no court could resolve. In the northern capital, the oracle of one god is consulted. In the southern city, another speaks. Through these rituals, the ruler remains constantly linked to invisible powers. The greatest of those powers at Thebes is Amen, whose sanctuary dominates the city. His temple did not begin as the immense complex seen today. In earlier centuries, it was a modest building, little more than a dark room with a curved roof and a fenced court before it. As the fortunes of the kingdom grew, so did the house of the god. Successive generations of kings added halls, gateways, and courtyards, each seeking to outshine the work of his predecessor. What was once a small shrine has become a labyrinth of stone, filled with columns as tall as trees and walls covered with reliefs of battles and festivals. The oldest chapel now stands hidden at the heart of a vast enclosure, like a seed inside layers of rock. The wealth supporting this splendour is enormous. The god owns fields and vineyards, herds of cattle, fishing grounds, and even distant towns that send tribute. Workshops produce linen, metal vessels, and incense for his ceremonies. Ships sail under his emblem, and soldiers fight in his name. Managing such an empire requires an army of officials, treasurers, scribes, overseers, engineers, and countless labourers. Among them, one of the most influential is the man in charge of the granaries. For grain is the foundation of all other resources. The storehouses resemble small fortresses of brick, each cell a tall, narrow chamber with only 2 openings. Through the upper hole, baskets of wheat and barley are poured in, measured carefully while a scribe notes every unit. The lower door allows the grain to be taken out when rations are distributed. From year to year, the overseer must know precisely what remains from earlier harvests and what has been newly delivered. A dishonest hand in this system could divert great quantities without immediate discovery. Until recently, the chief of the granaries, a respected scribe named Thothmes, enjoyed an unblemished reputation. Yet rumours began to circulate that something was wrong. Merchants whispered of altered measures, of entries in the registers that did not match the real stock, of sacks disappearing during the night. Some suspected ordinary thieves. Others believed the guardians themselves were involved. Because the property belonged to the god, the matter could not be judged by human magistrates alone. The case was brought before the sanctuary, where the divine presence would reveal the truth. On the morning of the inquiry, the hypostyle hall of the temple fills with silent figures. At the far end, 3 sacred arcs stand in a beam of light, and priests chant in low voices. The king arrives unexpectedly and takes a seat in a side aisle, waiting for the ceremony to conclude. The accused man stands among the officials, uncertain whether the oracle will condemn or protect him. In this world, justice is not separated from faith. A nod of the divine image can ruin a career, while stillness may restore honor. Beyond the temple walls, life continues as usual, but within them the atmosphere is heavy with expectation. The trial of a single administrator touches the entire network that feeds the city and its monuments. Grain stolen from the god weakens the festivals, delays building works, and leaves laborers hungry. For that reason, the issue is treated with the same gravity as a military threat. When the oracle finally signals its decision, the priests will announce it as the voice of Amen himself, and no further argument will be possible. In one of the temple storehouses, something quietly stops adding up. When the doors are sealed, the registers show a full measure of grain, enough to feed workers, priests, guards, and the endless routines of the sanctuary. Months later, when the seals are broken and the doors swing open again, the numbers no longer match what the eyes can see. A chamber that should hold an ocean of Dura now looks visibly thinned, as if a hidden stream has been draining it night after night. The deficit is not small. It is the kind of shortage that cannot be explained by a spilled basket or a careless count. Someone has been taking grain on a scale that would keep families alive for weeks. The labourers who haul sacks and sweep the courts claim ignorance. Their answers are vague, practiced, cautious. No one saw a break-in. No one heard the scraping of lids at night. No one noticed unfamiliar footprints in the dust. Yet, when questions tighten, the blame is gently pushed upward. The workers hint that if theft exists, it likely comes from hands that control keys, measures, and records. They do not accuse anyone by name, but the implication lands where it is meant to land. The men who count are more dangerous than the men who carry. Before long, suspicion circles around the chief administrator of the granaries, a high-ranking scribe trusted for years. At first, it is only rumour, the kind that rides through a city on half-spoken sentences. Then, it gathers weight. Missing grain affects offerings, rations, and order, and the problem stops being a private embarrassment. In Thebes, the temple is not merely a place of prayer, it is an institution with property, staff, and power. When its wealth is threatened, the matter becomes public, and the solution is sought where authority is believed to be absolute. The decisive step is taken by the highest priesthood. Instead of relying solely on human investigation, the case is carried before the living presence of the god. Deep within the sanctuary, out of ordinary sight, the divine image is kept in darkness and incense. On festival days, it may travel through courts and streets, carried in state as if the god himself is moving among his people. But even that movement is not assumed. Permission must be asked. If the image inclines, the priests interpret consent. If it remains still, the refusal is treated as meaningful, even ominous. Silence from the god can be read as displeasure. On a day when the city expects a procession, the divine image refuses to come out. The priests take the refusal as a sign that something is wrong inside the temple's own house. Attention turns sharply towards the granaries. The accused scribe is summoned and the threat is real. Imprisonment, confiscation, even death. Yet the inquiry that follows does not confirm his guilt. The truth, when it surfaces, is uglier in another way. A group of warehouse officials, scribes who write the numbers, and guards who control access, have been working together. They begin with small thefts, testing how easily grain can be siphoned away without detection. Success makes them bold. The theft grows into a system. Granaries are half emptied over time, and the stolen measure is divided among those involved. Then fear arrives. If discovery is close, a scapegoat becomes useful. The conspirators attempt to redirect blame toward the one man whose position makes him visible, the one man whose fall could shelter everyone beneath him. The accused scribe becomes the convenient target of a story designed to protect the guilty. The priesthood chooses a public reckoning. A day is set for the god's decision to be displayed openly, so that doubt will be cut off at the root. Before dawn, the chief priest enters the innermost rooms, barefoot, shaved, wrapped in clean white linen. The accused scribe walks beside him. The sanctuary is quiet in a way that feels heavier than silence, as if every wall is listening. The sacred vessel is there, not as decoration, but as a symbol of the god's movement through the world. It is shaped like a boat, built strong enough to touch water during certain rites. Its prow and stern are adorned with sacred emblems, and the whole structure rests on a litter designed for carrying. At the center stands a shrine-like cabin veiled in cloth. Inside, the divine image waits, golden in the dim light, eyes bright against the shadow, hair and beard dark, the face fixed in stillness that is treated as living attention. The chief priest presents two sealed texts. The words are not read aloud like a court record, they are offered like choices placed in the hands of power. One text demands prosecution and punishment. The other declares innocence. The priest speaks clearly, not as if persuading, but as if inviting a judgment that cannot be argued with. The divine image is asked to choose what is right. The ritual answer is simple, yet decisive. The image signals toward the text that declares the scribe innocent. The meaning is immediate. The priest does not stop there. He asks for protection. No execution, no prison, no seizure of property. He asks for restoration, the accused to return to his office and authority. Each request is met with signs of approval, and the temple officials accept that approval as final. The decision is then carried outward into the public spaces where people can witness it. Priests lift the sacred boat onto their shoulders. It moves through passages and courts, emerging into the great hall where light and crowd meet. Other sacred vessels join it, and the confirmation is repeated in front of watchers who have come to see whether the temple's own justice will devour a man or spare him. Again, the god affirms innocence. Again, the god approves reinstatement. The proclamation is made in terms that close the case and warn future accusers. Any attempt to reopen the matter will be treated not merely as an insult to the scribe, but as defiance of the divine decision itself. When the sacred vessels retreat back into darkness, the crowd disperses without noise. The chief priest turns from the god to the king. In Thebes, the head of the temple is not simply a religious figure. He is a political force, a manager of wealth, a commander of an enormous institution. His rise has been shaped by years of service, and his authority now reaches far beyond prayers and incense. But the day does not remain calm for long. Into the temple courts rushes a messenger from the north, breathless from speed. News has arrived from Syria. The palace protocols barely have time to unfold. The king demands the man's identity and purpose. The messenger answers as a servant of a local ruler loyal to Egypt, carrying a warning that cannot wait. The message is written on a clay tablet, pressed with foreign signs. The king understands the spoken language of the region, but the script itself belongs to another world. An interpreter steps forward and reads aloud. The report is blunt. A major northern power has broken its agreements. Troops have assembled, infantry, chariots, allies drawn from many lands. Cities and vassal rulers, who once paid tribute, are being attacked. Soldiers are killed. Livestock is seized. Families are taken. The allied chiefs are gathering like storm clouds around a fortified city. and loyal rulers are pleading for immediate support before they are overwhelmed. There is no time for long debate. War is not a question to be voted on now. It is a fact pressing at the borders. Orders are given quickly. Officials are instructed to raise men and equipment. Messages are dispatched to secure supplies and coordinate distant forces. The king prepares to depart, but before leaving he turns back toward the god, because victory is not imagined as a matter of strategy alone. In this world, battle is also a contest of divine powers. In the temple courtyard, everything is made ready for ritual. The divine image is positioned to face outward, as if receiving offerings from the visible world. Purification is treated as essential. Washing, clean garments, careful handling of sacred objects. Incense is presented. Water is poured in measured sequence. The order matters, the numbers matter, the gestures and spoken formulas matter, because the ritual is believed to operate like a precise mechanism. A mistake is not merely a mistake. It is a failure that could drain the act of its force. A bull is brought forward for sacrifice. Once, the old story goes, such an offering was a real hunt and a real feast prepared by the celebrant's own hands. Over time, the raw chase is softened into controlled ceremony. The animal is led to the appointed spot and restrained with practiced skill. The prince takes part, the king takes part, and the movement is staged to show the ruler as master of order, master of life and death, provider of the god's meal. The kill is swift. Blood is caught and presented. The chosen portions are removed. Food is piled with bread and produce. The offering is displayed as abundance placed at the god's feet. The temple specialists move with the confidence of repetition. Every step has been rehearsed by generations. Then comes what the king needs most, the assurance that the god goes with him. The priesthood speaks the promises in a voice meant to carry beyond the hall, beyond the walls, into the open air of the city. The god is said to stand beside the king in battle, to turn away arrows, to guide the chariot into the crush of combat, to cast enemies down and break alliances. The language multiplies images to match the many kinds of war the king may face. Enemy princes on land, raiders in marshes, fighters from mountains, charioteers from plains, sailors along the coast. Each threat receives its own picture of royal strength. A lion in the valley, a hawk sweeping from above, a bull driving forward, a hunter who does not release his prey. The order to mobilize does not spread across Egypt like a rumor. It moves like an instrument, precise and unavoidable. After the king commits to war, the message reaches the great officials who control the countryside, and within hours the machinery of the provinces begins to turn. One governor, responsible for a wide stretch of Upper Egypt, starts gathering men and supplies from several towns and temple districts, pulling from farming communities, craft centers, and old capitals whose names still carry prestige. He travels by river, stopping where the administrative networks are strongest. Because the Nile is faster than any road, and because the state's records and warehouses are tied to the riverbanks. These governors rule territories that look like miniature kingdoms, yet they are no longer kings. Long ago, powerful families held Egypt like a patchwork, each noble house behaving as if it were a dynasty in its own right. The rise of a strong royal line forced those families into a new position. Their titles remained, their wealth remained, their pride certainly remained, but their freedom shrank. They were watched by inspectors and scribes, loyal to the crown, and one wrong move could cost a man his office, his lands, or his life. Many of them carried a private hope that fortune might one day reverse the balance again, through a weak air, palace unrest, foreign attacks along the coasts, or a disastrous campaign that could fracture royal authority. Until such a moment arrived, some nobles served at court, while others ruled their districts quietly, careful not to invite suspicion. A provincial capital can look busy from the river and still feel half asleep once the boats are unloaded. Along the bank, there are labourers at work, songs rising and falling as cargo shifts from deck to shore. Storage buildings stand high behind crenellated walls, packed with grain, flax, bundles of cloth, and livestock counted for taxation and state use. From a distance, the scene suggests endless movement and prosperity. Yet behind that busy strip lies an older city of narrow lanes, small markets with too few customers, and workshops whose sounds are more persistent than loud. Dogs watch the streets with the tired patience of animals that live among people but do not belong to anyone. To one side, a major temple dominates the skyline, heavy with stone and authority, the kind of place that does not need to shout to be obeyed. Beyond the houses, gardens and canals carve the edge of cultivated land, and even the roads can feel hostile where thorny hedges lean into the path and punish the inattentive traveller. At the centre of this district stands the residence of the local prince, a fortified compound that is both home and government. Thick walls of mud bricks surround it, designed not only to display status but to endure trouble. Within the enclosure is a large courtyard and, around it, the working parts of rule: storerooms, stables, workshops, and the offices where scribes and overseers calculate what the land must deliver. The entire place is built to resist disorder, whether that disorder comes from angry subjects, desert raiders, or even royal troops sent to enforce obedience. Some strongholds like this have been taken by hunger rather than assault, simply because walls and gates are easier to break with time than with force. Running such a territory requires a full bureaucracy, not merely a noble title. There are officials responsible for cattle, fields, granaries, warehouses, mills, bakeries, patrols, and local justice. Councils of notables meet to approve decisions that must appear legitimate, and a herald announces decrees with theatrical seriousness, as if words alone could make compliance automatic. When the king's order arrives, especially an order tied to war, the system tightens. The local prince knows what is expected: a military contingent, supplies in kind, and proof of loyalty. Delay is dangerous. Hesitation is interpreted as resistance. The greatest problem is always the same. Ordinary Egyptians do not love soldiering. Literary satire makes that dislike sound almost official. Soldiers are portrayed as hungry, beaten, marched until their bodies fail, and punished for mistakes so small they would be forgiven in any other trade. The contrast is always drawn with the scribe, safe and respected, sitting in shade with ink-stained fingers and a full stomach. So when war approaches, many young men try the same old tactic: disappear into hills or remote places until the recruiters leave, then return quietly with small gifts to silence questions. This time, the trap closes too fast. The prince issues orders immediately, and village heads are compelled to produce bodies. Local leaders are held personally responsible. Their property and their safety depend on obedience. Men who might flee are seized first. For days and then weeks, groups of young men sit confined inside the fortress, waiting while officials decide which of them will be sent far away. What looks like a levy is also a form of hostage-taking. The state ensures compliance by removing the option of escape. When the royal commissioner arrives, formalities begin: greetings, public respect, feasts that underline hierarchy, while the real work waits for morning. At dawn, the courtyard becomes an administrative stage. The prince and the commissioner sit under a shaded structure where sunlight cannot glare off papyrus and ink. The military governor stands close, ready to interpret orders, into action. Scribes squat behind with writing boards and rolls. Enforcers wait at the edges, sticks in hand, not as symbolism but as policy. Outside the gates, villagers are already assembled, grouped by community under their local leaders. At a signal, the first group enters. The village head bows low, half speaking, half pleading. A scribe reads out population figures and obligations. Names are called. Each man answers by raising a hand. When a name is missing, the questions become sharp. Illness, exemption, disability, or flight. The village head tries to speak convincingly because he knows the cost of a wrong answer. A punishment beating is never far away, and it is used less for cruelty than for deterrence. The goal is to make village leadership police its own people. Those selected are separated and shut away again. Those not taken leave quickly, relieved and shaken, escaping with the feeling of surviving a storm. The process repeats village after village, day after day. From sunrise to night, roll calls, checking bodies, sorting strength, punishing hesitation, writing lists that transform living people into state property. Families gather at the gates, waiting for a face that might not return. When a son or husband fails to appear in the released crowd, grief erupts on the spot. The reaction resembles mourning because everyone understands the truth. Service in distant lands often means never coming home or returning broken, nameless, and poor. After several days, the commissioner inspects the captives himself and reduces the mass to a required number. This is the point where the levy becomes final. The weak are dismissed, the strong are kept. A district's obligation is measured in bodies, and the district has now paid. Yet not all soldiers are drawn by force. Alongside the reluctant recruits, there exist families for whom military service is inherited, like a duty attached to land. These households hold small tax-free estates, on condition that a man answers the summons when war comes. Their names are recorded separately, kept by local commanders. In peacetime, only a few are called for guard duty, but in war, the expectation becomes total. If a man is too old, a son or close relative replaces him. Here, fear is replaced by interest. Failure to appear can mean losing the family's land and falling into poverty. Once men are gathered, they must be turned into an army. In daily life, the average Egyptian carries no weapons. A shepherd might hold a heavy staff, a knife, or a bow for predators and raiders, but the state guards most war equipment in sealed depots. Infantry weapons are stored under official control. Horses and chariots are managed through specialized stables. Horses are still relatively new to Egypt compared to older forms of transport. They are valued, but they demand constant care and frequent replenishment from abroad because the climate and the rhythm of inundation weaken them over time. Major cities maintain breeding programs, and nobles treat chariots like luxury objects, symbols of prestige as much as tools of war. Chariots themselves are light by design. They are built to move fast and turn quickly, using wood and leather more than metal, with careful craftsmanship that prioritizes speed over heavy protection. The frame curves, the floor can be wood or tightly crossed leather, and the panels rise just high enough to shield the body without trapping movement. Two Egyptians ride together, a fighter and a driver, with roles that can shift in battle depending on the moment. The harnessing is quick, practiced, almost routine. Bow cases and quivers are fixed to the sides. The chariot becomes a moving platform for violence and status. The distribution of equipment is staged as a public event. Men assemble in companies. Forced recruits, hereditary soldiers, chariot crews. Before receiving weapons, they drill. They run in groups, halt suddenly, jump in formation, wrestle in bouts that entertain the watchers and test strength. Then the storehouses open, and the state begins handing out the tools of war. Armour is limited. Only the highest ranks and select guards may wear real protective gear. Most men fight with simple head coverings and minimal body protection, sometimes an apron-like guard of leather strips. Shields are large but require skill. They are not magic walls, but moving targets that must be angled correctly to catch a projectile on reinforced sections. Spears, axes, clubs, bows, daggers, and short blades circulate through the lines. Each item marks the soldier's place and function. The chariot men receive their vehicles and horses, and the courtyard fills with harnessing and movement. After equipment comes performance. A group of archers may demonstrate a martial dance borrowed from desert fighters, turning training into spectacle with rhythmic shouting, sudden turns, and sharp gestures that mimic ambush and pursuit. Then the march begins. Chariots first, light troops next, heavy infantry behind the sound of trumpets. Officers carry symbols of command rather than weapons. At the end, leaders step forward to salute the prince, and the ceremony closes with ritual formality as if order itself has been manufactured. The next morning is logistics. Soldiers collect rations for the initial march. Horses receive fodder. Bakers produce dense, dark loaves designed to last. Bread that dries hard and must be softened in water to be edible. Men arrive in squads, each taking an allotted share into a small bag. Boats wait at the river. Horses are crowded aboard, chariots and luggage stacked wherever space permits. The flotilla pushes off, and the district's contribution begins moving toward the larger army gathering at the frontier. That main force is not purely Egyptian. Kings often keep foreign guards close, not only for fighting ability, but for theatre. Strange helmets, unfamiliar weapons, and different faces amplify royal prestige. Some of these warriors come from desert tribes, others from raiding groups captured and then reshaped into royal service. They form a small elite corps, loyal to the king personally, armed and dressed in distinctive ways, separated from the mass of native troops by privilege and proximity. The Egyptian army itself is organized into major divisions associated with great gods. Provincial contingents are assigned to one of these formations when they arrive. Chariot troops remain a special arm under the direct command of the king and royal family. Rivalries run through the camp like hidden currents. Native infantry resent the favoured foreigners. Young nobles look down on common recruits, and each group doubts the courage of the others. A clever ruler uses that tension as fuel, turning jealousy into effort. The state also knows the limitations of its people. The average Egyptian is not painted as a reckless attacker in official imagination. He is described as durable, able to endure heat, hunger, and distance. He becomes the steady core of an army that holds its ground. The foreigners supply the shock, the aggression, the sudden surge forward. It is a deliberate mixture, like adding a fierce element to a patient mass, to make it move faster and hit harder. Inside the provincial palace, a child watches all of this with bright eyes. He is young, barely old enough for schooling, yet the sight of weapons and marching fills him with ambition. He begins neglecting his lessons, speaking as if an officer's life is glory and a scribe's life is boredom. Adults around him react with a mixture of irritation and amusement. The royal commissioner, entertained by the boy's enthusiasm, suggests he ask an experienced scribe for an honest opinion. The scribe is not just an accountant. He is quick, sharp, proud of his skill, and he enjoys language. When asked about the soldier's life, he does not answer casually. He delivers a prepared speech with rhythm and bite, designed to stick in the mind. He describes the infantryman's career beginning too early, the boy taken from childhood and placed under harsh discipline. Training is not presented as honourable hardship but as constant punishment. Mistakes bring blows. Fatigue is not temporary, it becomes a way of life. Then he paints the march beyond Egypt, food and water carried like an animal's burden, straps biting into the body, joints aching, posture ruined by weight and distance. Water is scarce or foul. Sleep is interrupted by guard duty. Even reaching the battlefield does not bring confidence. It brings trembling, because the enemy's arrows and noise strip away the fantasy of heroism. And if the man survives and returns, the scribe says, he returns used up, aged before his time, weakened like rotten wood. He arrives sick, carried home, robbed of what little he owns, abandoned by servants who run when hardship appears. The speech ends with a lesson that is less patriotic than practical. Admiration should not be given to the officer's path simply because it looks loud and exciting. The quiet life of records, ink, and calculation may be the real path to safety and respect. The boy does not hide his disappointment. The speech he has just heard drains colour from the picture in his head. A moment earlier, the clang of metal and the sharp call of trumpets made war look like a festival. Now, the same world sounds like hunger, heat, bruises, and long roads. Still, he clings to a last refuge, the idea that elite fighters must be spared the worst of it. Surely, the men of the chariots, the ones who ride behind fast horses and carry the pride of noble families, cannot suffer the same humiliations. The scribe answers without raising his voice. His tone stays calm, almost gentle, which makes the message land harder. If the boy wants the truth, the chariot does not rescue a man from hardship. It simply changes the shape of it. He describes the first step, the excitement of choosing horses from the royal breeding grounds. A young man picks two animals that look strong and elegant, and for a short time he feels chosen by fate. He returns home quickly, driving hard, not because he must, but because speed itself feels like freedom. The chariot is a toy of power when the road is flat and the heart is light, but that pleasure does not last. Before departure, there are practical losses that do not feel heroic. Property is handed over to older relatives. Tools, clothing, and household goods are redistributed. A life is placed on hold as if it might be recovered later. Then the chariot is brought forward, expensive, carefully built, and admired as proof of status. The young man climbs in and pushes the horses into a gallop again, still chasing the image of battle as glory. And then, the body reminds him that speed is not control. Reins catch on arms and clothing. A wheel skims a rut. The chariot jolts, the driver falls, and the roadside thorns tear at skin and fabric. The landscape is not a stage. It is a trap for the careless. Even small creatures become enemies. Insects, scorpions, anything that hides in dust and brush, can punish a man who hits the ground hard. When the officials inspect the harness and gear and discover mistakes, pity is not part of the system. The scribe's portrait is blunt. The novice is laid out and beaten until the lesson is carved into him. In this world, prestige does not cancel discipline. The chariot soldier is simply closer to expensive failure. The boy listens, but the love of struggle is stubborn. Children often fall in love with the idea of force because force looks simple. The scribe does not argue with the boy's nature. He predicts what time usually does. The fever cools, the child grows into a man who marries, takes a reliable post, and learns that stability feeds a household better than applause. In most cases, ambition is redirected into administration. The state always needs men who can count, write, and control stores. Yet the scribe also hints that this is not merely a family story, it is a change in the country itself. Earlier generations were more willing to serve for years. The soldier's path could be accepted as a proper life, not a punishment. Now, reluctance spreads, and that reluctance has consequences. campaigns become less decisive. Rivals who once paid tribute begin to negotiate as equals. Victories still happen, but the feeling of unstoppable momentum fades. To fill the gap, the rulers rely more heavily on outsiders. The foreign contingents are not the whole army, but they are increasingly important. Their aggressive style is useful, their loyalty is purchased, and their presence intimidates the population. But there is a shadow behind that solution. If native avoidance grows and the foreign share grows with it, the balance of power shifts. Mercenaries do not remain servants forever. The history of many kingdoms shows the pattern. Armed outsiders begin as tools and end as decision-makers. When a state trains foreigners to fight its battles, it also trains them to understand its weaknesses. The scribe does not need to say more. The warning is clear enough. After the levy and the departures, the atmosphere changes. Lists and registers return to the centre of life. Taxes are inspected. Goods are collected. Cloth from local workshops, grain stored in state granaries, and arrears that have piled up are counted and moved. Boats are loaded. The official who came to mobilize men now also gathers the state's wealth. He could leave immediately, but the local prince presses hospitality. A few extra days are requested, and the offer is framed as pleasure. A hunt in the desert country beyond the fields. The prince's favourite villa lies outside the town, near a rough valley that cuts into the edge of the desert. It is chosen for a practical reason. Game is more plentiful where cultivated land breaks and the wild begins. The party leaves early, not taking the long, formal road, but cutting across fields while the air is still cool. The countryside at this hour is layered with crops. Bean plants stand high, thick with scent, swallowing the lower legs of riders and animals in green. Beyond them lie stretches of grain and other staples, then scattered palm clusters that mark drier ground. Eventually a canal appears, not wide like the river, but broad enough to slow travellers. Its water is stagnant in places, hemmed in by clay banks that crumble where feet and hooves have worn them down. A ford lies nearby, and a herd reaches it first. The animals move slowly, crowding the crossing. The lead shepherd pauses and speaks quickly, not to the cattle, but to what might be watching from the water. The words are not casual. They are protective speech, the kind meant to turn danger away. Crocodiles haunt fords because fords are where life passes through narrow points. The shepherd's formula is part command, part threat, part belief, and the belief itself is a tool. The herd enters. Water rises around their bodies. A calf is too small to manage alone, so a herdsman carries it, the animal protesting and calling toward its mother. The scene feels ordinary and tense at once. Daily work performed on the edge of real risk. On the far side stands a poor village of low huts, but near the canal a very different wall rises, high, crenellated, built to signal status and to keep out trouble. Behind it is the villa. The entrance is designed to impress. A monumental gateway frames the opening. White-tip plaster catches the light. Inscriptions declare lineage, loyalty, and the right to build grandly. Massive wooden doors are kept for ceremony. Ordinary traffic uses side passages because everyday life does not need theatre, but the theatre is always ready when important guests appear. Inside, the garden is arranged with deliberate geometry. It is large and square, divided into sections by low stone boundaries. Small painted gates separate one space from the next. The planting is not only practical, but political in its own quiet way. Egypt's native plant life is limited, and the elite compensate by importing novelty. Foreign trees, new fruits, unfamiliar flowers, anything rare becomes a sign of reach and power. Some of these plants arrive through royal expeditions and military campaigns, carried back as living trophies. Others arrive through private networks and gifts. Over generations, orchards change. Apples, almonds, pomegranates, and new kinds of grapes and figs spread along the riverbanks, and noble families compete to display the most unusual specimen. The prince takes pride in his collection, guiding his guest as if walking through an argument about wealth. Among his favourites is a rare palm from harsh desert zones, far from the safe canals. It is valued partly because it is scarce, partly because its fruit yields a sweet liquid before it ripens. The tree is not just a plant, it is a story, brought back during an earlier state project, nurtured into survival, and now used as proof that the household stands close to royal achievements. Nearby, pools lie in symmetrical placement, edged with stone, filled with lotus blooms and crowded with ducks. A screen of taller trees lines the wall to block dust and wind, turning the villa into a sheltered island of shade. The property is not only decorative, it is an engine. Vines climb over trellises. Pressing areas and storage spaces support winemaking. The land is kept productive through constant water lifting. Along canals, simple mechanical devices raise water again and again through the day. A labourer works the lever, filling a basket, lifting it, pouring it into a trench that feeds a grid of garden plots. The system is repetitive, exhausting, and effective. The garden is divided into small squares where vegetables grow in rotation, and the water moves from one plot to the next until the last receives what remains. Overflow is captured in basins that serve both people and animals. With this method, fresh produce can appear even when the seasonal flood is not enough on its own. Not every piece of land is irrigated so carefully. Where seepage reaches, grass grows thick and bright for a time, dotted with small flowers in changing colours. A few steps away, where moisture fails, the ground turns harsh again. This boundary shapes a seasonal migration of flocks. Herds move across the estate in winter, guided by shepherds who live outdoors for days at a time, drinking from pools and canals, sleeping under open sky. When a patch is grazed down, the group moves on. The shepherds form their own world, rougher, less tied to settled routines, often viewed with suspicion by respectable townspeople. Their appearance and habits mark them as different. In popular belief, even the colour of hair can become a moral sign, as if nature itself had branded certain people as closer to dangerous forces. North of the villa, the canal widens into a marshy pool. Here, water plants thicken until the surface looks like a green ceiling. Narrow channels wind through the vegetation, just wide enough for small boats. The marsh is loud with life. Birds nest and feed. Insects pulse above the water. Fish move in hidden layers. Such places can shelter predators too, crocodiles, and sometimes even large animals that wander in after the flood retreats. The marsh could be drained and turned to fields, and year by year the river's mud makes that task easier. But the estate owners leave it alone for a reason. It is not wasted land in their eyes. It is a private preserve for fishing and fowling, a source of food and entertainment. The next morning, the household turns the marsh into a stage for leisure. Boats are brought out, very light craft built from bundles of reeds with a small wooden frame. They can be carried on shoulders from pool to pool. They tip easily, but the riders do not fear it. Swimming is common, clothing is minimal, and embarrassment carries less weight than it might elsewhere. The prince chooses fishing with a long, double-pointed harpoon. He stands, knees flexed, watching for movement beneath the surface. When he strikes, it is fast and practiced, the kind of motion learned through repetition. Others prefer birds. A trained decoy animal is used to draw game closer. and a trained cat is brought to retrieve. Instead of bow or spear, curved throwing sticks are carried in quantity. They are thrown with a sharp snap of the wrist, and when they connect cleanly, birds drop from the air stunned or dead. The retriever darts forward, sometimes stealing eggs or nestlings along the way, because training never erases instinct entirely. This kind of sport belongs to the wealthy. The working professionals use nets because nets waste less effort and bring more reliable results. Fishing nets are cast from shore or boat, weighted to sink and stretched by floats so they hold shape in water. On a signal, teams haul them in together. Large fish are carried by hand, small ones in baskets, and then the processing begins: gutting, salting, drying in open air. The taste is strong and the smell stronger, but for many households it is a rare indulgence, and practicality matters more than delicacy. Bird nets are used in a similar way, stretched over frames and set where birds feed. Bait is scattered. The fowlers hide and wait. At the right moment, the frame snaps shut, and the marsh erupts in wings and noise. Some birds escape. Many do not. The youngest may be kept alive for taming. The rest are killed, plucked, cleaned, and preserved in salt. Later, the meat is soaked to remove excess salt, and then eaten raw or cooked into stews. It is not refined cuisine, but it fills tables. Beyond the marsh lies the older meaning of hunting. In earlier times, it was not simply pleasure. It reinforced herds and removed threats. Many animals were not fully domesticated at first. The wild edges between canal and mountain were the best grounds for pursuit. Gazelle and other desert game came down for water and could be driven into gullies or across flatlands where dogs could track them. Injured young animals might be brought back and raised near homes, forming mixed herds that were part amusement and part emergency food supply. Over time, people learned which species were worth taming and which were not. Herding and farming expanded. Hunting shifted from necessity to spectacle. Across Egypt's provinces, hunting is not left to chance. Many districts keep permanent gamekeepers under a chief, men who spend so much of their lives in the hills that the landscape becomes a map stored in the body. They learn every track that bends around a cliff, every hidden spring that survives the heat, every ravine that funnels wind and footsteps. Over time, they become something more than hunters. They are early warning on the edge of the cultivated world, watching for raiders and scouting movement beyond the canals. Their knowledge, sharpened by constant wandering, has often protected towns and rich farmlands from sudden desert incursions. For a planned hunt, preparations begin days in advance. The chief keeper receives orders to stage a drive lasting several days toward a place locals call the Lake of Gazelles. The meeting point is fixed at the mouth of a valley near a landmark known to everyone who travels these edges. The party reaches it with a short walk along the canal. Then, an abrupt turn east, where the green ends and stone takes over. The valley itself looks like the scar of a river that no longer runs. Its floor is fine sand scattered with fallen rocks, and the walls rise steeply. Sun and time have weakened the upper layers so that whole shelves of stone crumble into sloping banks of rubble. When winter rains come, flash water bites into those banks, undermines them, and drags blocks downhill toward the plain. The path narrows deeper in, interrupted by ledges of harder rock that the water has not fully erased. During the rainy season, those ledges become steps for brief waterfalls, and in the dry months they become obstacles that force travellers to climb along thin tracks lined with loose stones. At one point, the valley opens into a flat stretch, then tightens again where a smaller gorge cuts through it. Even here, the old work of water continues on a reduced scale. a trench carved down into the stone, cluttered with pebbles and heavy boulders that shift a little each year. In the shade, vegetation survives longer than it does outside the ravine. Tough shrubs push out of crevices, wherever a handful of soil has gathered. A few puddles remain from the last rains, and in one sheltered pocket a thread of water still runs, leaping over stones as if it refuses to admit that the season has changed. The riders and attendants move slowly through this terrain. A massive boulder stands near the sound of falling water on the right side, wider at the top than the base, shaped almost like a tent. For generations, hunters have rested under it. The stone is marked with scratched names and crude scenes carved by knife points, animals pursued in the desert, birds in motion, and the outline of a desert protector figure with raised arms. It is a landmark and a memory bank, a record made without ink. The keepers arrive with equipment and animals. Nets and stakes are carried like burdens of strategy. Greyhounds strain at their leashes, restless, and keyed to the smell of open ground. Once the groups join, they push farther up to a spring where water collects slowly in a narrow funnel of rock. It stays cool even when the air heats up. Nearby, a shallow niche has been cut into the stone and treated as sacred space. A small place of respect set beside the only reliable water for a long distance. The party eats in the shade and waits out the harshest hours. Later in the afternoon, the pace changes. The route grows longer and rougher, but the group presses on, leaving the valley behind. The landscape shifts in stages, tight passages choked by boulders, then a wider area where a few palms stand like survivors, then another spring that seeps drop by drop from the mountain. Beyond that is open ground scattered with rock, and a winding track leads up onto a broad plateau, rolling away in gentle waves. By nightfall, the caravan reaches a hollow that holds water. Local speech gives it an impressive name, the Lake of Gazelles, though it is more basin than lake. The hunt is built around the logic of thirst. Animals in the area pass certain routes as they come down to drink, and those routes can be turned into traps. Nets are stretched across the mouth of a steep ravine. Then the hunters make a wide circuit and take position at the far end with dogs waiting. At dawn, the routine of wildlife becomes the hunter's advantage. Gazelles and other animals enter the gorge the way they always do. When enough have passed through, another set of nets closes the exit, and the ravine becomes a cage. Dogs are released to drive the trapped animals forward toward a barrier where the principal hunters are posted. From behind cover, arrows can be loosed, without the exhausting chase that a desert hunt usually demands. The trap yields more than gazelles. Hares, antelopes, ostriches, jackals, lynx, even hyenas can be forced into range. In a short time, the gorge fills with movement, dust, barking, and the sharp impacts of arrows. It is efficient, brutal, and over quickly. Older hunters still remember when such expeditions carried more risk. Big cats once ranged these margins in greater numbers, and a man tracking smaller prey could suddenly meet a predator face to face. In those moments the roles reversed, but the rulers of this era are relentless in their pursuit of dangerous animals, and constant royal hunting has thinned their numbers. The desert has not become safe, but certain threats have grown rarer. Even so, the night fires bring another kind of danger into the conversation. Creatures described by desert tribes as half animal and half something else, seen at a distance on the horizon and never caught. Many officials dismiss the stories as exaggeration, yet guides and hunters repeat them with confidence and detail. Alongside these legends come older beliefs about ordinary animals. The idea that certain creatures can paralyze a person with a stare, or draw a victim forward as if the will has been stolen. The stories spread easily in the dark when the desert seems wider than the eye and every sound feels like a presence. No monsters appear during the days by the basin. The hunt ends like most hunts end, with exhaustion disguised as satisfaction. The senior official returns pleased but drained, his mind heavy, concentration slipping. He decides it is better to be unwell at home than unwell on the road. Boats carrying collected taxes are gathered along the way, and diligent stewards are summoned to travel with him so their service can be rewarded in person. After about a week, he reaches the city again. Family welcomes him with relief and chatter that keeps him awake long into the night. For a while, the warmth of home makes him forget the weight in his head. Sleep, however, does not come easily. Fatigue mixes with unsettled memory until the mind feels crowded by the last few days, as if the desert has followed him inside. Egyptian sleepers often rest the head on a curved wooden support rather than a soft pillow, and many households place protective figures near the bed to keep harmful forces away during the night. Yet this time, the sense of pressure does not lift. He feels surrounded by something hostile, something that cannot be argued with. Eventually he sleeps, but the rest is shallow and disturbed. Morning brings a hard command. A messenger arrives with orders for an immediate appearance at the palace. The timing is cruel because the illness has strengthened overnight. Heat in the head, dryness in the mouth, aches in the limbs, involuntary shudders, none of it matters in the face of royal authority. He dresses carefully, even adding colour to his face to hide how unwell he looks, then forces himself into his chariot. The palace is not built like a temple meant to endure forever. It is lighter, more practical. Brick, wood, simple stone with strong walls that can look like fortifications in uneasy times. Inside are separate buildings for different functions. Quarters for guards, storerooms, garden courts with trees and pools, spaces where the royal household can live and retreat. Foreign guards stand watch near Egyptian archers, their presence designed to impress and intimidate. During formal audience, the ruler appears elevated in a shaded gallery, framed by bright textiles and carved woodwork. The court follows strict etiquette. A subject must approach as if overwhelmed, tongue-tied, body weakened by awe. Only when the ruler gives permission does the official rise and speak. The report is brief but meaningful. The mission succeeded, the granaries and tax stores yielded more than expected, and the local stewards fulfilled their tasks. Then the ruler makes a joke at the official's expense, teasing him for looking like a man of the fields. In that court, humour is not casual. It is a sign of favour. The laughter spreads outward in a controlled wave through ranks of status. Moments later, the reward is ordered, gold and valuable ornaments to mark service. Collars and bracelets are brought out in piles. The ruler and royal family toss them down from the platform in a gesture that turns wealth into spectacle. Assistants fasten the largest collar and layer the others until the official's chest is weighted like armour made of honour. He holds himself upright long enough to recite public thanks, and the stewards are decorated in turn. A scribe records every name and every piece distributed. Outside, wine and beer are poured for those gathered to witness the generosity. For a brief time, the court becomes noise, movement, celebration, exactly the kind of public joy that reinforces power. But once the official leaves the palace, the body reclaims control. Pride keeps him standing only until he crosses the threshold. At home, he collapses as if the strength has been pulled out of him. The heavy gold is removed. He is undressed and laid down. Consciousness comes and goes in a painful haze. What looked like a passing weakness now feels like something serious, something with its own momentum. In this world, illness is rarely treated as random biology. Many people are not willing to accept sickness and death as ordinary outcomes of age. A life, once started, is imagined as something that should continue unless interrupted. If it ends, someone or something must have attacked it. Sometimes the cause is obvious: a fall, an animal, a broken object, a strike from another person. But often the enemy is invisible. A spirit, a hostile force, a resentful dead, even a god's displeasure might be blamed for entering the body and tearing it down from within. The symptoms are understood as violence: bones weakened, blood drained, organs consumed, an invasion that must be expelled before it finishes its work. That belief shapes medicine into a double duty. The healer must identify what kind of force is afflicting the patient, then confront it. Words, rituals, and protective objects are meant to drive it out. At the same time, the body must be treated for the damage already done, using diet, rest, and substances gathered from plants and minerals. Some healers lean heavily toward ritual and incantation, convinced that once the unseen attacker is removed, the body will recover. Others focus on remedies, studying which materials help, which conditions, and when and how they must be prepared. Certain ingredients are considered powerless unless gathered under specific conditions, at particular times, or in certain seasons. The most respected practitioners combine approaches. They decide when ritual is essential and when practical treatment is enough. Their work becomes a careful blend, commands directed at invisible threats alongside measured attempts to stabilize the body. Knowledge is guarded and accumulated over time. Copies of remedies circulate among professionals, and each healer adds notes based on results. What helped, what failed, what proved dangerous. Experience is saved rather than lost, and the tradition grows by annotation and memory, case after case. Keat refuses to watch her husband fade without a fight. As evening falls, she sends for a specialist known across Thebes, for dealing with the worst head pains and the invisible forces people believe can cause them. The man arrives with assistance and a kit that makes his work look both practical and mysterious. A book of formulas, clay for quick models, ink, linen, dried plants, and small figures shaped from wax or fired earth. Nothing about him suggests hesitation. One look at Saru is enough, he claims, to identify the enemy. This is not ordinary sickness. A dead visitor, returning night after night, is feeding on the living man's strength. His first response is direct and theatrical. He kneads clay and plant fibers into a compact ball, lowering his voice as he speaks words meant to turn a fragile human body into protected territory. The logic behind this kind of ritual is simple. A spirit can be frightened away if it believes the victim is guarded by powers far above the human world. The healer frames Psaru as someone surrounded by divine protection, then pushes the idea further, naming body parts one by one and assigning each a sacred force, as if the man's head, eyes, lips, teeth, and spine were not merely flesh, but a set of living shields. The aim is not medical explanation. It is intimidation. The message is meant for the intruder, not for the family. When the recitation ends, the clay ball is placed beneath the patient's head. The healer repeats the spell several times, reinforcing the boundary. The promise is clear: the nightly attacker will be weakened as long as the charm remains in place. Kite, reassured for the moment, pays him discreetly and asks him to return the next day. The following morning brings a grim surprise. Saru's night is full of troubled dreams, and then his body reacts violently: bleeding, feverish collapse, and foul sickness that frightens the household. The healer does not treat this as failure. To him, it is resistance. A spirit forced away from one place in the body will strike elsewhere, searching for new access. That belief leads to a second ritual, borrowed from a well-known sacred story about shifting pain out of a god and into an image. He takes a small doll from his case, speaks a new set of words over it, and tries to trick higher powers into responding, as if they are rushing to save the sun itself, while in reality, the household hopes the illness will transfer into the figure and leave Saru's body behind. But days pass. The headaches lessen, yet the decline continues in other forms. Spots appear on the skin, strength drains, awareness dulls, and the man who once managed accounts and officials now seems barely present. The exorcist has reached his limit. The family turns to a different kind of authority, a physician trained in the great temple tradition and attached to the royal court. The doctor arrives with a colder discipline. He does not argue with the household's fears, but he does not feed them either. He asks about symptoms, the timing, what treatments were tried, then examines the patient carefully from head to foot. His conclusion is quiet and bleak. This is a severe internal illness described in formal medical writings, something that might have been contained early, but has now advanced too far. He offers a remedy anyway, partly out of duty, partly to leave no step undone. Yet the tone of the visit tells the family what he will not say aloud. The outcome is likely settled. That night, pain snaps Saru awake. Shivering takes him, sickness follows, and the room fills with the strained stillness that comes when people realize the end is close. Kayet stays beside him. The children sit around the bed, not speaking much except for short cries that break the silence. Words of love and helplessness repeated and then cut off, as if the house cannot bear to hear itself. Near morning, the moment arrives. The first cries rise, loud enough to wake neighbours, and the news spreads instantly. The great official is gone. Grief turns into public ritual. People throw themselves onto the body, embrace it, soak it in tears, strike their chests, tear clothing. Then the women rush out into the street with dust in their hair and feet bare, calling out as they run. The sound pulls others from their homes, half-dressed, joining the wailing procession. The neighbourhood becomes an echo chamber of loss. Behind the noise, servants wash the body quickly and carry it away, to those whose task is to prepare the dead. In this worldview, death is not simply the body failing. The breath stops, but the person is thought to continue in a fragile way. That continued existence is tied to the corpse. As the body decays, the surviving self is believed to weaken, lose awareness, and finally vanish. Letting the body rot is therefore more than neglect. It is a second death, stretched out and frightening. The answer is preservation, keeping the body intact so that the surviving self can remain stable. That is why embalming becomes more than craft. It becomes rescue. The process begins with a choice of quality, because preservation is also a matter of status and expense. The wealthiest method is selected for Saru without debate. His service was high, and the king's favour is expected to cover the cost. The work itself is performed with formal gestures and strict roles. Prayers mark each stage. The brain is removed through the nostril in pieces. An incision is made at a precise point on the side of the torso, and the organs that decay fastest are taken out. The body cavity is cleaned, treated, filled with aromatics, and then the remains are soaked in a powerful drying salt for many weeks. While the body is being transformed, an entire economy of workshops turns to the needs of the dead. The goal is to provide the deceased with a complete second household. Furniture, containers, personal items, symbols of rank, and objects for travel and work. Coffins are made to match the body closely, shaped like a standing figure, with a face carved to resemble the man. Idealized, calm, and strangely lifelike. Everything is built around one expectation. The dead should have the equivalent of what he valued in life, so that nothing essential is missing in the next phase of existence. At home, mourning reshapes daily life. The household reduces food, abandons luxury, neglects grooming, and gathers regularly to weep together. The routines of the living pause, as if the house itself is holding its breath until the preparations are complete. On the edge of the necropolis, life clings to the folds of the hills. Small clusters of mud huts sit in the hollows of ravines, forming an entire service settlement for the city of the dead. Guards and police soldiers live here with their families. So do quarrymen who cut burial corridors into the rock, painters and craftsmen who decorate them, minor clergy who perform memorial rites, and vendors who sell offerings to visiting relatives. Everyone in these huts understands the same uncomfortable truth. Extraordinary wealth is being lowered into the ground almost every day. Gold, jewellery, amulets, fine linens, and ritual equipment vanish into tomb chambers only a few steps away from where the workers sleep. That proximity turns temptation into routine. Tomb robbery becomes less an occasional crime and more a shadow economy that the community struggles to contain. Some thieves work cautiously and alone, targeting abandoned monuments whose owners have no descendants left to check on them. Others operate in groups and aim higher, paying for protection or silence from local officials, then striking recent burials, while memories are still fresh. The most daring raids even reach elite tombs. Robbers do not stop at furniture and portable goods. Coffins are forced open. Bodies are pulled apart to strip rings, collars, and hidden amulets. Then the remains are rearranged into convincing fakes. From outside, the deception can look perfect. Only when the wrappings are removed does the fraud become obvious. Authorities respond in waves. Investigations are ordered, damage is assessed, suspects are dragged before a tribunal, and harsh sentences follow. Executions and public beatings are meant to scare the rest into obedience. Yet the effect fades quickly. A few weeks pass, attention moves elsewhere, and the looting begins again. In a landscape where riches lie underfoot, punishment competes with desperation and greed every day. Against this background, Saru's funeral preparations move forward with the solemnity expected for a high official. The embalmed body returns home briefly and is placed on a ceremonial bed. Beneath it sit the stone jars that hold the organs removed during mummification. Each jar has a different lid shaped like a protective figure, marking a system meant to guard what the body can no longer defend. The message is clear. The dead must be protected against decay and theft, even in pieces. Now, everything is ready. The tomb stands prepared. The grave goods are assembled. Relatives and allies have been summoned. Morning arrives for the final departure, the moment when the dead are taken from the household and carried into the burial valley. The people closest to Saru try one last time to resist what cannot be reversed. The widow and servants cling to the wrapped body. They throw themselves in front of the men who have come to lift it. Their grief turns physical, as if holding the mummy could delay loss. In the end, exhaustion wins. The struggle collapses into resignation, and Saru passes the doorway of his home for the last time. The procession begins with offerings. Servants and dependents lead, carrying cakes, flowers, water, scented oils, and drink. Animals for sacrifice are brought forward. Painted boxes meant to store food and ritual figures move, along with low tables stacked with fruit and palm branches. Then comes the household equipment. Linen chests, folding stools, chairs, a bed. A chariot appears, heavy enough to make the bearers stagger. Another chariot rolls behind, drawn by horses and guided by an attendant. The volume of objects is not accidental. The burial is not merely disposal. It is the construction of a second life underground, furnished and supplied. A third group follows with ceremonial equipment and personal insignia. Containers for libations, the case for the organ jars, the jars themselves, then trays holding a gilded face mask, staffs of office, weapons, jewellery, chains, scarabs, and protective emblems shaped like birds. Some of these items are solid gold, others are gilded wood, all designed to shine in the sun. That glitter draws admiration from the crowd, but also envy. Displaying wealth so openly in a place already plagued by theft is a dangerous contradiction, and everyone knows it. After the goods come mourners and attendants, whose job is to manage the ritual atmosphere. A servant sprinkles liquid onto the ground at intervals to control dust and mark the path. A ritual leader walks with a distinctive garment and a golden implement used to cast scented water toward the crowd, purifying the space and signalling that this is sacred movement, not ordinary traffic. Only then does the main bier appear, a boat-shaped structure mounted on a sled, pulled by oxen and guided by labourers. Inside a covered cabin, the mummy remains hidden from view. Female relatives move around it unpredictably, sometimes ahead, sometimes beside it, sometimes falling behind. Friends of the family follow with staffs in hand and formal cloaks draped over their shoulders. Behind them gathers the mass of onlookers, drawn by spectacle as much as sympathy. The pace is slow, almost stubborn. The procession stops frequently, as if every pause is a small refusal to accept finality. Noise is not treated as disrespect, it is expected. Grief here is public performance as well as genuine pain. Families hire professional mourners trained to cry, tear at their hair, and stage despair with practiced intensity. Relatives and friends often join in, turning personal loss into a shared disturbance meant to shake the living out of indifference. Call and response phrases punctuate the march. The direction of the dead is spoken aloud again and again, pointed toward the western horizon, the landscape associated with burial and the afterlife. The lines are formal and repeated, a ritual vocabulary that almost anyone can improvise. The result can sound monotonous, but that repetition is the point. Grief is poured into fixed shapes so the community knows how to behave. At the riverbank, the procession changes form. People and offerings crowd into hired barges. Family members and professional mourners board the household boats modified for the occasion. The funeral bark, lighter and more ornate, takes the central role, designed to evoke sacred precedent and carry the dead across the boundary of the Nile. The crossing is not treated as ordinary transport. It is symbolic travel, a rehearsal of the passage from the world of the living to the world beyond. Shouts rise from the banks as the boats pull away. Blessings are called out, wishing the dead a peaceful landing on the western side. Lamentations continue on the water. The widow's grief breaks through the scripted phrases into raw protest, calling for the boatmen to stop, demanding that the dead not be taken away. The sailors ignore it, focused on steering and distance. A sudden jolt from a collision or a turn can spill some offerings into the river, but no one stops for them. The ritual must keep moving. On the far bank, the procession reforms and climbs into the cemetery hills. The slope becomes too steep for oxen to drag the heavy sled any further. Friends lift the bier onto their shoulders and struggle upward along narrow paths that wind between tomb entrances and cut stone facades. At a platform carved into the hillside, the group pauses before a low doorway cut into the rock. The mummy is stood upright against the cliff face, facing the crowd like a master arriving at a new house. This is the last public moment. Prayers are spoken. Incense is offered. The mourners collapse to the ground in renewed cries. Female relatives press flowers to the wrappings and cling to the body, speaking directly to the dead with a mix of affection, disbelief, and anger at abandonment. The priest continues the official rite calmly, naming the deceased in formal terms and offering libations to the invisible self believed to survive death. Then the mummy is carried into the darkness. Once it passes the threshold, the world of daylight is left behind for good. Inside, the tomb is designed like a residence. A public chapel receives visitors and offerings on festival days, while deeper chambers remain private, reserved for the dead alone. Walls are covered with painted scenes of ordinary life, fields being ploughed and harvested, animals raised, fish caught, workshops at work, food prepared, banquets held, music and dance performed. These images are not decoration in the modern sense. They are thought to be functional. They promise that what is shown can be made real for the dead. A supply of work, food, and pleasure that never runs out. Even the most carefully prepared tomb cannot guarantee an endless future. There comes a time when visits stop. A family line ends, or moves away, or simply grows distant from the dead. Priests who once maintained offerings on schedule begin to neglect their duties once nobody is checking. In theory, that abandonment should doom the spirit to hunger and weakness. In practice, the tomb itself becomes a last refuge. The walls, crowded with scenes of food, labour and celebration, are believed to provide a permanent supply when human devotion fails. But a deeper problem remains. Mummification preserves the body by turning it into something stable and inert, and that stability comes at a cost. A sealed and wrapped form cannot eat, speak, see, or move. If the dead are to live again in any meaningful sense, those abilities must be restored through ritual. This is the moment for one of the most important ceremonies in the entire funerary process. A sequence of rites intended to return function to the dead, as if switching life back on after it has been carefully paused. The officiants bring the mummy upright in the chapel, steadying it on a mound of sand. Assistants perform a careful cycle of purification using water, incense, and mineral substances in the same formal manner used when sacred images are prepared for worship. The language of the rite frames the dead as protected and reawakened, released from stillness, restored to awareness, and allowed to regain a shadow and a presence in the world beyond the tomb. Then the ritual becomes more dramatic. A sacrificed animal is butchered, and a bloody cut of meat is lifted toward the face mask as if to invite the dead to eat. The mouth remains sealed, so specialized tools are applied to the lips and face, instruments that symbolically force open what death has closed. The point is not physical feeding, but permission. From that moment onward, the dead are imagined as free to perceive, to speak, to accept offerings, and to move as they choose within the invisible geography of the afterlife. The ceremony ends not with silence, but with a meal. The first banquet staged in the eternal house, shared by the living and the dead in different forms. Beyond the decorated rooms, a final chamber waits, bare and unadorned, cut deep into the rock. This is where the body will remain for as long as the tomb survives. Workers slide the nested coffins against the western wall. Containers holding the preserved organs are carried in with chests, furniture, and stores from the procession. After the last prayer, the doorway is sealed with brick. Footsteps fade down the corridor. A torch left inside burns low and dies. The mummy is shut away from the living world. Up above, in the chapel, the banquet begins. The dead do not sit at the table in a human form, yet the ceremony treats their presence as real. A carved image of the deceased presides over the gathering, receiving the first portion of each dish. In this worldview, objects possess a counterpart of their own. A chair has a chair self, a bed has a bed self, food has a food self. The living consume what is visible, The dead consume what is invisible. Music and dance follow, performed not only for the mourners, but for the dead as a final act of welcome into the new residence. The songs are blunt about time. Life is brief, pleasure is urgent, rest in the tomb is permanent. When the festival ends, the living must leave. The last link is broken. A harpist steps forward and sings a lament that turns into advice. The world changes, power fades, monuments are abandoned, and no wealth can be carried beyond the grave. Grief cannot reverse what has happened. The only certainty is that the living will follow the same road one day. The lesson is not nihilism, but realism. Enjoy life while it is present, because the other side is silent and final. What happens afterward is not agreed on by everyone. Many people imagine the dead remaining near the tomb, existing dimly, and emerging only if hunger drives them. Such restless spirits, neglected or angry, are thought to wander at night and bring illness to the living out of bitterness. Some stories go further and describe the dead as harmful by nature, returning even when they have been properly honoured. In those tales, the living defend themselves not with weapons, but with words, formal messages placed in the tomb, warnings that the case will be carried to divine judgment if the harassment continues. The dead, confronted with the threat of a cosmic court, are expected to back down. Others picture a more ambitious destiny. After a time in the tomb, the soul is imagined to depart toward a distant realm, ruled by powerful gods. The journey is described as dangerous, crossing hostile landscapes filled with beasts, burning waters, and traps. Only those equipped with protective charms and correct recitations survive the passage. At the end lies a great lake and a final crossing. There, the soul faces interrogation and judgment. A moral accounting decides whether it may enter a perfected land of abundance, where crops grow impossibly high and work is lightened by servant figures placed in the grave to answer when called. For many, that paradise is concrete and almost agricultural. Harvests, feasts, conversation, games. For others, it is too earthly to be the full truth. Higher explanations are hinted at but rarely spelled out to ordinary people. The only shared conviction is survival itself. The exact shape of it remains uncertain. While Saru's funeral world closes behind sealed doors, another world is already moving far to the northeast. Pharaoh is no longer in the palace city. The army has gathered near the frontier and begun its slow push towards Syria. Columns advance along desert tracks and coastal routes, moving from one staging point to the next. Reports arrive from governors and officers, yet the situation remains oddly quiet. Major coastal cities show no open rebellion. Northern threats remain out of sight. The silence is suspicious. A powerful enemy does not vanish without leaving a footprint. One interpretation suggests a defensive strategy. Troops dispersed across fortresses, forcing the Egyptians into long sieges, one citadel after another. That kind of war bleeds an army over years. Another interpretation points to something more dangerous. A coalition held back for a single decisive strike. Allies, drawn from distant regions, do not travel far to sit behind walls. If they have been summoned, it is likely because their leader expects a major battle soon and wants to use them before they lose patience and go home. Orders go out to intensify reconnaissance. Frontier commanders are told to search the country around the key northern objectives. Scouts are sent in multiple directions. One, toward the east beyond the river lands to watch nomads. Another, toward Damascus to ensure nothing is stirring there. And a trusted equerry is dispatched up the coast, through major ports and across the mountains. His assignment is clear. Cross Lebanon, reach the army's line, farther north, and learn what can be learned about enemy strength, composition, and location. The scout rides light with only a single servant. The landscape between Gaza and the coastal towns seems productive, yet strangely empty. Harvest has begun, but villages stand half abandoned. The reason is practical, not mysterious. Armies, even disciplined ones, consume and seize. Locals expect pillage. They gather valuables and flee with their flocks into fortified hilltop settlements, waiting for the storm of soldiers to pass. North of the coastal settlements, the terrain changes. Dark, cultivated ground gives way to red sand. Scattered trees thicken into rough woodland. Rivers twist through the undergrowth. Marshes appear where water stagnates. For someone raised in open riverland, this is unsettling country, limited visibility, uncertain paths, hidden hazards and animals that do not belong to the Nile Valley's everyday experience. The scout's caution sharpens into anxiety. Every movement in the brush suggests ambush. A strike from a branch or the snag of a thorn feels like an attack. The chariot jolts on stones and sinks into soft patches. A sudden mistake spooks the horses, the vehicle tips, and the rider is thrown hard onto the ground. Blood and bruises follow, not from enemies, but from the road itself. The climb begins. The route narrows between rock faces and drop-offs. Repairs are made on the fly when parts of the chariot loosen or snap. Then the mountain corridor opens, and the view changes again. A broad plain appears beyond the pass, and in the distance a fortified hill rises from the landscape, Megiddo. Megiddo is not large, and it is not glamorous. Its power lies in position. It sits where the roads converge, controlling movement between north and south, between inland routes and coastal approaches, between Egypt's sphere and the rival kingdoms beyond. Its defences follow the shape of the hill rather than a neat geometric plan. Stone walls trace the contours of the land. Towers break the line at intervals. The main gate is set between flanking towers, so defenders can strike attackers from both sides. Such places can fall to assault, but they more often fall to hunger. Siege is a weapon that works slowly, and Megiddo has learned what that means across generations. Armies have met beneath its walls time and again because the geography forces them there. Whoever holds Megiddo holds the hinge of the region. Egypt's control over many Syrian cities rarely looks like direct occupation. Local rulers often remain in place, governing as hereditary princes, while an Egyptian garrison and a small network of royal oversight ensures loyalty. The system is built less on replacement and more on obligation. Each year envoys arrive to collect tribute and to settle disputes that might threaten the relationship between a vassal and the pharaoh. Inside the city walls, daily life usually continues as before. Traditional laws remain valid, local temples keep their rituals, and succession follows older customs. Yet, this arrangement is fragile whenever a new ruler takes the throne in Egypt. A change in power invites calculation. Some Syrian princes test the limits by refusing tribute, attacking the messengers, or trying to expel the symbols of Egyptian authority. Alone, most cannot endure the response, so alliances form quickly. 24 rulers may pull troops into a single force, hoping numbers will create a shield strong enough to survive a campaign. The answer from Egypt tends to be swift. Pharaoh marches north, smashes the coalition, and compels submission one city at a time. Punishment varies. Sometimes the rebels are reinstated under strict terms. Sometimes leaders are arrested or executed, and a son is raised to the throne under Egyptian supervision. If the family is too compromised, a more pliable relative replaces them. From Megiddo, 2 main routes lead toward the Phoenician coast. One is longer, hugging the sea and passing through safer towns and familiar way stations. The other is shorter but climbs into rough country, notorious for bandits who prey on travellers and caravans. Bauku chooses the dangerous road for a reason. Outlaws hear rumours, see patrols, and notice movements long before officials do. A bargain is struck with a local guide, paid well enough to promise safe passage. The crossing succeeds, but it yields no intelligence. The bandits either know nothing or refuse to speak. They claim they have seen no enemy forces and doubt the main army is near Kadesh. When the mountains open and the sea appears, Bauku's attention shifts from fear to astonishment. The water stretches outward like a second sky, dotted with sails and fringed with white foam where waves strike rock. Foreigners often assume Egyptians dread the sea, but the truth is simpler. Egypt has limited natural harbours, and much of its coast is hostile to anchoring. River travel has always been easier and safer. Still, when Egyptians are forced onto open water, they are not helpless. The Nile trains them from childhood in oars, sails, and steering. Expeditions across distant seas have succeeded before, and royal galleys can and do reach Phoenician ports. What differs is confidence. Phoenician sailors treat rough water as a familiar road, while many Egyptians prefer to keep land in sight. The coastal road north is dramatic and punishing. Mountains crowd the shoreline so tightly that the path sometimes drops to the beach, sometimes climbs in sharp turns, and sometimes is carved directly into rock. In one place, steps are cut into the stone like an enormous ladder above the surf. Waves slam against the cliff below, and storms can shear fragments from the wall. Bauku advances cautiously at first, then faster once the danger becomes predictable. Beyond the last rocky obstacle, the land broadens into cultivated plain, olive groves, orchards, and two cities facing each other across the water. An older settlement on the mainland, and a towered island city rising from the sea. Tyre's island position is its shield. The channel between coast and island functions like a moat. In war, the mainland can burn while the island holds, supplied by fleets that bring food, labour, and mercenaries beyond an enemy's reach. That security explains why Tyre accepts Egyptian suzerainty rather than rejecting it. A proud refusal might have satisfied vanity, but it would have endangered trade and threatened access to Egypt's most profitable markets. Submission, measured and practical, protects commerce. Tribute is paid, but the profit made from Egyptian connections multiplies, far beyond the cost. Pharaoh, in return, gains steady partners who cause little trouble. Bauku leaves his horses and damaged equipment in the mainland settlement under the care of Egypt's local representative, then crosses by boat to the island city. The urban landscape feels alien to an Egyptian. Space is tight, streets are narrow passages between tall multi-storey buildings, and every inch of ground is used. Temples stand with barely enough room for ceremonies. Shipyards line the canals. Workshops hum with production. Dyed textiles, glasswork, metal vessels, and small luxury items modelled on Egyptian designs and sold across the Mediterranean. The streets show the port's true nature. A crowded crossroads of languages, clothing styles, and faces from far beyond the Nile. Sailors, merchants, hired men, and visitors move with purpose. In the harbour, Egyptian ships sit alongside Phoenician vessels. Egyptian craft resemble river boats, adapted for sea travel. Low hulls, shallow holds, crews trained to row and sail efficiently, and soldiers positioned on deck when battle threatens. Phoenician ships tend to be longer, sturdier, and better suited to open water. Their crews navigate more boldly, sailing at night, crossing wider distances and building networks of seasonal trading stations that sometimes grow into permanent settlements. Trade is not always polite. In some places, locals attack merchants out of desperation or temptation. In other places, merchants exploit weakness, turning a market into a raid, seizing captives and sailing away before the shore can respond. Human trafficking is part of the system, especially in a city that lives by maritime reach and foreign demand. The port's wealth rests not only on goods, but also on people moved, like cargo. At last, Baoku receives what he came for: credible intelligence. Pharaoh has entered the Orontes region and is advancing toward Kadesh. The enemy's main force is not absent. It is hidden. Light units move in the open, but the core of the army is concealed in the folds of the mountains. Baoku decides the risk is worth it. To warn Pharaoh properly, he needs exact positions, not rumours. He pushes beyond Sidon and climbs into heavy forest. The trees are taller, older, and denser than anything he has seen before. Cedar and fir shut out light. The air feels still, the silence oppressive. The road is not a true road at all, only faint tracks known to goat herds and wanderers. His chariot breaks again. Toward evening, he reaches a high ridge and collapses from exhaustion, too tired to eat or build a fire. By morning, the guide has vanished. The servant has vanished too. Theft has done what enemies could not, stripping him of support and leaving him alone in fog so thick the ground disappears a few steps ahead. He waits. As the sun rises, the mist lifts in layers. Peaks appear first, then slopes, then valleys. Finally, the landscape opens like a map. Fields, small villages, lines of trees marking rivers, and, in the distance, the Egyptian camp. Beyond it lies water glittering near Kadesh. Baoku abandons the broken chariot, takes the horses by the reins, and hurries downhill. If he can reach the camp quickly, a warning might still matter. Then a low roar of sound carries through the valley ahead, the noise of many men and animals moving at once. He approaches carefully, peering through brush, and sees an army assembled in formation, ready to move. It is the enemy's hidden mass, held back until the moment of strike. Orders ripple down the lines. Teams harness chariots. Whips crack. Wheels begin to roll. The first divisions move slowly, using trees and folds in the land to conceal their approach. They are not rushing because they are not chasing. They are preparing a surprise. Basuku watches long enough to understand the scale. The leading chariots are heavier than Egyptian models, carrying 3 men, driver, fighter, and shield bearer. Behind them follow allied contingents, drawn from different regions, and the column stretches far enough to suggest thousands of chariots divided into multiple groups. The movement is deliberate, masked, and aimed toward the Egyptian position. He bolts for open ground, driving the horses hard. A few enemy chariots peel off to pursue, but they cannot close the distance. Arrows fly and fall short. The warning must reach Pharaoh before the trap closes. The Egyptian camp near Kadesh sits behind a simple but effective field defense. A rectangular enclosure with a ditch and an earthen rampart. A single gate controls entry. Guards stand with weapons ready, day and night. Inside, the space is organized like a mobile city. The king's section is set apart, filled with the comforts of command, sleeping quarters, an audience space, a dining area, and a small place for offerings and ritual. Nearby are the tents and gear of princes, officers, and chariot men. Farther out are lines of horses, vehicles, baggage, and draft animals. Life inside the camp is public and constant. Men sharpen blades, repair chariots, cook, drink, argue, and rest under the open sky. Animals mill around. Donkeys bray. Everything suggests routine, yet the mood is split. Scouts report little. The enemy remains unseen. Some younger soldiers begin to speak as if silence means fear. Veterans read it differently. A capable enemy does not vanish by accident. Silence can be preparation. If the hills and ravines could be opened like a curtain, an army might be standing there already, waiting. Ramesses carries the burden of command with a restless mind. Scouts returning from every direction insist that no hostile force stands within many leagues. Yet this calm feels unnatural. The idea that Kitasir would surrender his richest provinces without resistance is difficult to accept. Nomads brought before the king repeat a convenient story. The Hittite army is still far to the north, gathering slowly near the city of Kalibu. Some advisors argue that this is an opportunity. If Egypt moves quickly, the enemy might be struck before its allies can assemble. After long debate, the decision is made to trust the reports. The king gathers his commanders and outlines a bold plan. At dawn, the army will leave the camp and advance beyond Kadesh, carrying the war into the heart of Hittite territory. The divisions are assigned their routes. The Legion of Phra will move on the southern flank toward Shabtuna. The Legion of Tar will take the central road toward Arnam. The Legion of Sutesh will march on the heights to the right. Only the Legion of Amen, with the royal household, will remain in camp for another day. Through the night, the camp stirs with preparation. Weapons are checked, harness repaired, rations counted. When the first light touches the plain, 3 long columns begin to move in the dust. From the hills above, enemy scouts watch every step. Their signals reach Kitasir within the hour. He must now decide whether this is a trap or a mistake. The Egyptian formations grow smaller in the distance, vanishing toward the north. The standards show clearly that 2/3 of Pharaoh's strength have gone. Only 1 legion and the royal guard remain near Kadesh. The Hittite king sees his moment. If the camp can be overwhelmed before the other divisions return, Egypt will lose its leader and the campaign will collapse in a single day. Orders race through the hidden army. Chariots are harnessed, shields raised, horses led into line. By midday, the plain looks peaceful again, and inside the Egyptian enclosure, life has resumed its routine. Soldiers cook, mend straps, argue over dice. No one expects what is about to break over them. While Ramesses speaks with his sons in the royal tent, scouts arrive dragging 2 prisoners. Under harsh questioning, the men confess they are Hittite spies. They reveal what the king feared. Kitasir is not distant at all. His full army waits behind Kadesh, reinforced by allies from many lands. The Bedouin reports were lies meant to lure Egypt forward. Fury spreads through the council. The generals realize how close disaster has come. Messengers are sent at once to recall the marching legions, yet even as the orders leave the tent, a new rider arrives. It is Bauku, breathless and covered in dust, who has seen the enemy moving. He barely finishes speaking before the horizon darkens with chariots. The assault is sudden and violent. The makeshift rampart crumbles beneath the rush of wheels and men. Guards at the gate are cut down before they can form a line. Confusion sweeps the enclosure. A few squads rally around the royal quarters, but they are pushed back by numbers. In minutes, the camp is half in Hittite hands. From the centre of the turmoil, the king appears, armoured and furious, mounting his chariot beside his lion, the great beast trained for war. With only his driver at his side, he charges directly into the mass. The royal escort is scattered, yet Ramesses refuses to turn. According to the memory preserved by Egypt, he calls upon the god Amen and drives again and again into the circle of enemies, striking where the line is thickest. The Hittite warriors, astonished by the ferocity of a lone chariot, hesitate. Each attack gives the remaining Egyptians a moment to breathe. For hours, the fight sways around the royal standard. The Legion of Amen bleeds away, and the household guard is nearly destroyed. At last, a thunder of horns rises from the rear of the enemy. The Legion of Ptah, recalled in time, arrives in solid formation. Its chariots crash into the Hittite flank, breaking the encirclement. The attackers fall back toward the river, many driven into the water. Exhausted and disordered, the Egyptians cannot pursue far, and night ends the struggle. At dawn, both sides prepare again. Kitasir brings forward the reserves he had kept behind the walls of Kadesh. Ramesses arranges his remaining forces in 3 wings, placing the remnants of Amen in reserve. The Hittite chariots deploy across the plain, protected on one side by the river. When the signal sounds, the 2 lines rush together with a roar of wheels and hooves. Egyptian archers release their first volleys at close range, throwing the enemy ranks into confusion. The heavier Hittite vehicles press forward with lances levelled, and for a moment they pierce the centre. Ramesses leads a counter-charge on the flank, driving the attackers toward the water. Kitasir himself is swept away in the retreat and barely reaches the city, pulled from the river, half drowned by his attendants. Infantry pours out from the gates to cover the withdrawal, and the battle ends with the field held by Egypt, but victory far from complete. That evening, the camp counts its dead and gathers the grim tokens of war. Pharaoh listens to his commanders with stern face. He reminds them how close their negligence brought the army to ruin. Yet he also knows that without their return, the kingdom would have been lost. Anger softens into calculation. The Hittite host is damaged, but not destroyed, and Kadesh remains strong. A long siege might undo everything gained. Before another day begins, envoys arrive from the city carrying a message from Kitasir. The letter speaks in humble tones, acknowledging the might of Egypt and asking that life be spared to those who remain. Ramesses convenes his council. After formal debate, the generals advise mercy. The king accepts, and the armies separate. What follows is not true peace, but a pause, a breathing space in a war that will flare again for many seasons. Years pass before a lasting settlement is reached. Negotiations travel slowly between courts until, at last, silver tablets bearing the words of a treaty are exchanged in the delta. The agreement binds the 2 empires to mutual aid. If either is attacked, the other will send chariots and archers. Merchants and craftsmen who cross the border are protected, and fugitives must be returned without harm. The long hostility between Egypt and Hatti is formally ended. To seal the alliance, Ramesses marries a Hittite princess, and later, Kitasir himself visits Egypt as an honoured guest. For a generation, the frontiers remain quiet. The king turns his energy to temples and cities, leaving campaigns to younger men. Ramesses reigns into extreme old age. When he dies, after more than 6 decades on the throne, his funeral is celebrated with the splendour reserved for a god on earth. His body rests in the Valley of the Kings, then is moved again in troubled times to protect it from thieves. Centuries later, the hidden chamber is rediscovered, and the face that once looked across the battlefield of Kadesh meets the modern world. The mummy reveals a tall, slender man with a narrow skull, delicate ears, and traces of white hair at the temples. The expression still suggests pride and command. The weapons are gone, the army's dust, yet the memory of that day on the plain endures, when a single decision and a desperate charge shaped the balance between 2 great empires.